Thank you all. Good evening. I am going to call Monday, November 10th, 2014, Planning Board in session at 6:31. If we can all stand and pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good evening, welcome. Just a reminder for all guests, there's a sign-up sheet right over there on the conference table. Did we move that to the podium? I know last meeting we moved it. Okay, it's over at the conference table, so if you have a minute, just please make sure you sign that. Thank you so much. Okay, do we have any board comment?
Not for me.
Do we have any public comment? Okay, we'll go right into 6:35. We have a public hearing for Highfield Village. So I will go into that.
Not being 6:35, we can't start that yet.
Oh, it's not 6:35 yet, okay. We could go into the first set of minutes that we have, number item 6. We have minutes dated 10/2014, Master Planning Workshop. These were all emailed to us. I'm looking for a motion on those minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from 10/2014. That's all three of them.
Second?
Do we have any discussion on the minutes that were emailed? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great, thank you. The next set of minutes we have are the Planning Board meeting of October 27th, 2014.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from 10/27/14.
Second?
Do we have any discussion on the Planning Board minutes of October 27th, 2014? All in favor?
Aye.
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 And the third one is, again, October 27th. This was the public hearing on Flat Hill Community Solar.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from the Flat Hill Community Solar hearing on 10/27/14.
Second?
Okay, and do we have any discussion on those minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Matthew, you don't vote. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Sorry.
All in favor with the four of us?
Aye.
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 And I. Thank you all so much.
Also, please don't sign them.
It was, thank you.
Don't sign the public hearing of the 27th.
Thank you.
Okay, is it 6:35? It is. Okay, so now I will go into the,
That clock's 3 minutes fast, just.
okay. Committee reports, MRPC. I have no meeting as of yet. Capital Planning. We met, the fire chief came in front of us with his needs for the season. The committee took those under advisement. Right now, we're just scheduling every other Tuesday. We meet usually 4:30 or 5:30. That way, the town manager and Jamie Toll is the chair of our board, and he's also selectman, so we do it Tuesday so they can go right to their selectman meeting. And we right now just have department heads coming on every agenda to hear their needs, and then we'll start to prioritize them. So that's it with the capital planning. School Building Committee, Nathan.
No update.
Open Space, Nathan.
No update.
Building Reuse Committee, Damon.
So we met last week. I kind of gave them an update on what we were doing as far as the village zoning and how we're going through that. Right now, they're kind of focusing on what they can actually do at this moment in time, because a lot of it's kind of held up by zoning or release of property from the school or people occupying the Ritter building. So they're trying to figure out what they can do right now and make positive moves. So studying the town hall and what kind of moves we can make with this are kind of seem to be where the most room to run with. So they're going to do some programming exercises and cost estimating exercises and try to, as far as with capital planning, maybe make some suggestions about making some good faith efforts of restoring even just the front of the building or something like that, just to show that the town is invested in the building and wants to see it stay and be a positive part of the community, so,
And Jamie did bring that up, painting the
yeah. So that was kind of the highlight of the day.
Can I ask one question with the reuse committee? And I know with our village bylaw, we were going kind of far out. People thought it was too big.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have any input on where they felt the mapping should be for the village district as a committee?
No, they realize that it's our job to do that, it's not their
Okay.
job, so.
But I just didn't know if they
yeah.
had any input, if they
No.
thought it was too big, go smaller. Okay.
Nope.
Thank you. All right, and we have one more, MJTC, Ken.
Yeah, the next meeting is Wednesday, the 19th. so-
Okay, and Matthew, agricultural.
There have, excuse me, there has been no meeting, but I did attend the building reuse to forward the notion of the AgComs that the building reuse committee should look at the potential of a public market for possible reuse, and that was met with they would gladly meet hearing that, and they had a lot of questions. So I'm gonna have to work with the AgCom and get together a business plan.
Oh, great.
So
Wonderful. Good
Positive.
job. Thank you. All right, so that is it for committee reports. So I'll go back now. I'm short 6:35 now. Perfect. I'll go back and I am going to open up the continuation of the public hearing for Highfield Village. Is this the Highfield Village one?
635 Highfield Village, yep.
Okay. The Lunenburg Planning Board will hold a public hearing on November 10th, 2014 at 6:35 PM at the Lunenburg Town Hall, 17 Main Street, Lunenburg, Mass. To hear and discuss a definitive plan per the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land and Section 5.6 cluster development of the protective bylaw of the town of Lunenburg. The application is to construct 66 dwelling units off the south side of Northfield Road between Massachusetts Ave, map 057, parcel 0031, and Northfield Road, map 0037, parcel 0009. Owners are John and David Selba, 227 Lewis Wharf, Boston, Mass. 02110, and Robert Leveron, trustee, Lunenburg Nominee Trust, 880 Winter Street, Suite 340, Waltham, Mass. 02451. Applicant is JEG Holdings, LLC, 46 Prince Street, P.O. Box 5515, Beverly, Mass. 09115. Copies are on file in the planning office. Notice of said hearing will be duly posted in the usual posting places. And we do post them in the newspapers. That was all done. The abutters were notified. Okay, and on November 3rd, we did get a packet from our, please,
I was going to say, if I may, the
please.
applicant has requested a continuance
Please.
to the first meeting in February.
And I have that, I was looking for that here.
So I would suggest that the board look to continue to that date and not discuss or take testimony based on the request. If members have individual comments based on the review letter or their review of the plans and packets, you can forward them to me directly, and I will share them with both the applicant and the engineer. But without the applicant present, taking testimony or discussion is generally an unfair hearing process.
I was just going to say they did get a packet
They did.
on November 3rd from our peer review engineer that the applicant just received as well. So that's why they were requesting an extension.
correct.
To be able to review the packet they received. And they figured with the holidays, it would best to be go with, I believe it was January. That's, I'm looking for the letter.
I've received, this is the letter here. I've
I'm
received
thinking it
two
was
communications. There was an email from the principal of the development team who suggested the first meeting after the new year. The official and formal letter from the engineer looks towards February. So I think that based on this being the most recent letter from Mr. Oldfield, I would think it would be appropriate to continue to the February hearing date.
Okay. Do we know what date that is off the top? February, the first meeting in February?
I believe it's on the form, isn't it? The ninth
Yes, it
of
is,
February.
February 9th.
February 9th, 2015 is what they're looking to continue it to. So I would look for a motion to continue the public hearing of Highfield Village to February 9th, 2015.
So moved?
Second.
Time? 6:35?
6:35, yes, please. Do we have any discussion?
Yeah, it's fine. I really hope they're ready to talk in February. This is, you know the history.
Yeah, I do. And I think that the difference is this is, if I'm not mistaken, the first full formal review that they've received with engineering comments. Is that correct? Yes. So I think the previous review was prior to them settling the sewerage issue with the sewer commission, and I think that they're at a point where they can move forward.
Yep.
And you've all seen the packet. It was extensive, and I think that, a 7-day turnaround wasn't possible.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was just hoping in the future, if they're gonna request for an extension, they tell us ahead of time so the butters don't show up here and waste their time.
Yeah, and I received the formal request today.
Yeah, I know.
I have a question. Is there a number? Did you follow up and find out how many extensions have been granted to this point?
I haven't had a chance to pull all that out. And again, I think that it's up to the board whether they choose to grant the extension, but by granting it, you are freezing the time clock. So you aren't up against the statutory time limit. But I can get you that number on Wednesday sometime.
And what was the term for that? Constructive
Constructive approval.
approval, so that if we didn't make a decision, then...
It would start the 135 days. You're probably a number into that, but I don't think that you're pushing up against it.
Okay.
I know Marjorie and I have had conversations about this, and it seems that she's pretty good, or has been pretty good about making sure that they keep their extensions going and on file, and that does do a good job of freezing the clock.
So if we don't approve the extension, then they will get constructive approval?
Well, you would know, what would happen is the hearing would continue, and every day would count off of the 135 days. So you get very close to them getting constructive approval.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other? Okay, so all in favor of extending Highfield Village to February 9th, 2015 at 6:35 PM? All in favor?
No.
Aye.
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 Four butters.
Now, is this all Northfields? And then I'll have a different folder for, okay,
Yeah, it's 7 o'clock, we can't do that.
keep that. And the Flat Hill's not till 7, so we've got 15 minutes.
Yeah, I don't see.
Pleasant Street Solar?
I don't see Eric. Hi, Wes. Good, how are you? I don't see Eric either.
No, we can.
Yes.
All right, so we'll go in, because we can't start the next public hearing till 7, so we'll go into... I lost my... The middle school, high school project, do we have any update? Oh, I'm sorry, White Woods.
The developer has come and indicated that they have completed their punch list items. An email was sent to the review engineer as well as the DPW director. They are coordinating a final inspection with the intent that at the next available town meeting, or with the intent of starting the street acceptance process for preparation for the next town meeting. Oh, that's Whitetail Crossing. I apologize. White Woods, okay, he's requested his final inspection, correct? That's what
That's the
and that,
road?
yes, that's for the road, for, yeah, for Jacqueline Drive.
Marjorie, did I give you my agenda with the packet I gave you back?
Oh, Whitetail Crossing's down here.
They have white in the title.
There we go.
That's mine, but
That's
you can,
yours.
you can read it. It's
Thank
okay.
you, we'll share. All right, the next one we have is Highfield Village.
Which you just did.
Definitive subplan, 50 Elmwood Road. Was there any new on that? I saw the update. And they're still just doing hauling out of sand and gravel.
Correct.
And screening the sand, so that's good. And one of the things we had with them, just if we get any calls, was that they had to, the hauling, just go out to two-way. They couldn't use the back roads, side
could- yeah,
roads.
okay.
So just if anybody calls, that was one of their, part of their gravel, is that they're using just the little bit of Elmwood down to Flat Hill. So just watch for that. And
And I've-
Concon has 3 notices
They do.
of intent for lots 5, 6, and 7 for their 11/19 meeting. So it looks like Elmwood's gonna go in front of Conservation on November 19th for lots 5, 6, and 7. Just as an informative. Whitetail Crossing,
I just gave you that update.
yeah, you did a good job,
It
thank you.
was, hey, they had white in the title.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, because they tried to get on for last year, but there was still a little bit of,
Yeah, they had a significant amount
maintenance.
of work, and I think that at this point, they've completed that, and they're waiting for their final inspection.
Okay, perfect.
Joanna, quick question.
Yes, please.
You said Elmwood's going in front of conservation for lots 5, 6, and 7.
Yes.
Is that for building, or what's that for exactly?
Yeah, I'm going to go out on I'm gonna put my assumption hat on.
Go ahead.
Generally, when developers do a subdivision, what they'll do is they'll permit the road. They'll come and see the planning board, they'll get the road, here it is, yay. And before they do that, they go to Concom, and they only map the wetlands, and they only get a notice of intent for the work within the road. And then each individual lot, they'll go and get a separate notice of intent to sort of work with that lot individually. So I imagine that these are the beginning lots that they want to work with that have some potential wetland issues, so they're going to permit them through the winter with the intent that in the spring, they would be able to start putting houses up.
Okay, so they probably haven't even completed grading. For
No, I would imagine that they haven't. They're probably still going to do hauling, and they'll probably haul until the ground's too frozen for them to be able to do that. They're doing the pre-permitting stuff. We know where the wetlands are. This is kind of where we want to put the house. This is what the hay bale line's going to be. And that sort of allows them that once they're ready to, they have the permit in hand and they can just move forward with construction.
Got it, thanks for explaining.
Any other questions on that?
I have a question. Excuse me. Since some of the perk tests and deep hole tests for the septic systems were in areas where the septic system was proposed in a 10-foot cut, are they going to redo any of that? I mean, it was explained to me when I asked this question before that that's indicative of those types of soils, but Board of Health has certain requirements for testing, and if they were in an area of 10-foot cut, the bottom of the 10-foot hole is at the surface existing.
I'm not going to speculate. Every Board of Health is different. I know that they all follow Title V, but there could be local regulations. I think you are correct. They probably did go in perk based on what was there, and then once they did the design, prior to the installation permit, they'll make them prove that they have the groundwater separation that's required, or they'll have to put the mounted system in.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. 909 Mass Ave. Is that the gas station?
That is the antique business
That's
that you
okay.
permitted by special permit.
Yeah. So is that done? Did we sign off on that?
Yes, you did.
Everybody signed off?
Yes.
It's in the 21 day, okay, thank you. Tri-Town Landing, no report. Middle school, high school, no report. Emerald Place at Lake Whalum. Force Corp. 305, no report. And 651 Chase Road and 265 Pleasant Street, we'll talk Pleasant tonight. Nothing on Chase.
Technically, you have a report for Pleasant Street, but,
Alrighty.
well, he'll give it to you.
All right. Okay, I thought we were just doing,
Well, you are. I mean, that's kind of the wrap-up of it.
oh, all right. Village District Bylaw, we got a new updated one you just sent us this evening.
You did, and here's sort of where I'd like to go with it. You have the bylaw in a complete draft, front to back. I would like for the members to review it, make individual comments on your copies. You know, if you want to discuss it with me, if you have questions, feel free to contact me. And then either at a meeting or if you want to have a workshop, then come back, go through the section by section, address comments per section, and sort of try and get a list of final comments to wrap it up and have a complete draft. And that way we can be prepared when, and, you know, when town meeting is ready.
Okay, so let me ask the board, we did get that today. So looking at our meeting schedule, we have one meeting in November left, November 24th, and then we have December 8th and December 26th. Do you want to schedule a workshop in one of those months?
Question first.
Yes.
Any update on when the next town meeting is going to be?
No, as of right now, May,
May.
they're not thinking there
Yeah.
is going to be a winter one.
Okay, thanks.
And the reality is, based on the discussion that we've had around historic preservation, if there were a winter meeting, I think it would be more appropriate to have this for spring to allow us to address the two in concert. I know that was a concern of some of the residents of the area. The Historic Commission has approached me with some concerns about that. I know that there's members of the board who are concerned, so I think that just to, you know, the difference between, if we had a January meeting, the difference between January and May isn't going to be so significant, but it will allow us to address the historic preservation aspect and propose the two concurrently and sort of maybe hopefully assuage some of the general concerns about introducing commercial and keeping historic properties.
Sounds great.
So back to, do we want to have a workshop November, December?
You could also backload a meeting and, you know, do board business and then have an hour of discussion on the bylaw, if that's, you know, better than trying to squeeze in a third meeting in a month.
A workshop's fine with me, but I'll leave it up to everybody else.
Yeah, December 15th looks like it, you know, it's a tough season to do it, but
December,
I'm
I think
supposed to
it's
do my shopping that night, but that's okay. I'll make other plans.
See, I was thinking December 22nd was when I was going to do mine.
So, you want to skip November, go into December, look at December 15th?
oh, well, okay, no, we could do, well, what time, where are we in November? We're on the 10th.
We're on
okay.
our first meeting, so we have
wow.
two, right.
Yeah, I'm thinking,
I think the next meeting might be a problem.
And people might have a better familiarity with their calendar for November versus December.
is there 31 days in November?
That I don't know. I love my Nathan.
Forget
No,
the,
because I think that Thanksgiving is late into December.
oh, wait, oh, okay.
November has 30 days, so we can have a meeting, a workshop on
Well,
November
Yeah,
17th.
the 17th is open, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I'd like to review what they got.
I think the
it's-
17th is a little quick.
Okay, so we can back end it, how about this? We can
That's
read
it.
the material, and
December 1st.
we can back end it November 24th, if you think, or we can book the workshop for the 15th, if you feel that it needs a workshop, if there's a lot more that we need to do.
Why don't we decide on the 24th?
Why don't we put it on the agenda for the 24th
Was-
with the option that if it seems that the meeting is long or everybody has an immense amount of things to talk about, we can look at moving it forward.
Okay,
That
Fair.
sounds good to me.
sounds great.
And if you can let me know beforehand,
Yeah, just.
That it
just-
looks like you have, you know, a ton of issues. That way, if there's other elected officials or members of the public who are thinking about coming, they don't come and sit and then, you know, it gets to be 9 o'clock and everybody goes, you know, we really have a lot to talk about. Let's push this off.
Yeah, and just as kind of a forcing function, it might be cool if everybody, like, if you can make a point to read it and like email Adam, if you think everything in it is great, send him an email, say, this is perfect. This is like,
I hope it's not
Because
perfect.
that always happens.
and if you find stuff, send him 20 pages of corrections or whatever, you know.
Well, I figured you'd
Just
cover
don't
that for
not
us.
send him anything. What's that?
I said, I figured you'd cover the 20 pages.
20 pages, yeah,
Right.
okay, yeah, that's me.
So if I write, it's good, I know you got my back.
Yeah, I'm that guy, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd have it no other way.
Oh, yeah, I know.
All right, so that's what we'll do.
Perfect.
You're gonna email all your thoughts,
Got it? Sure.
questions to Adam, and then we'll go forward from there. And we still have a couple minutes. So- Scenic Road, Flat Hill and Northfield Road, where are we on the,
My understanding is we were waiting just for town meeting to put together the warrant article. The question was raised at the last meeting about whether or not there was funding for having scenic roads. I was unable to find anything that extended to funding. There are some view shed bylaws out there. They're generally kind of complicated, and you're generally looking at designating specific districts where you would save a view shed. It's not a omnibus bylaw that would cover everything in town. It would only be specific areas. So, you know, it seems to me as if the board is amenable to recommending these as scenic roads. There was some discussion about having a public forum. Again, we can certainly do that. I would want to do it closer to town meeting, and, you know, the warrant article is relatively standard language, so I have the ability to put that together in fairly short order. And then economic development, I know it's.
can we go back to?
Oh, sure.
The Scenic Road. So from now till maybe March, there's nothing really else we're going to do.
I don't believe so. I mean, it's a very simple process. It's a recommendation to town meeting, the warrant article gets put together, and town meeting votes on it.
Okay.
I know that there have been some residents who have expressed interest in supporting the planning board, but outside of actually holding a meeting or a discussion, there's not a lot to do.
So can we put on our website or the town website that, just a little blurb that we're looking to have these? Because just what I struggle with and is I live on Sunset Lane and I go to vote or I go to town meeting and I learned that my road became scenic. And I had no part of it, yay or nay, becoming scenic. It was just scenic. Because it's not that 20, 30 people from Northfield Road came and said, hey, we'd like to make our road scenic. We're doing this. So, and where we don't have a lot of money to send out mailings and inform them, if we just could have a blurb on the website that says, just as another way to communicate it to the people that live on those roads.
Yeah, we could put that together.
Perfect. That's all I, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, that's great. And I think it's great that this was, it's an interaction file. I'm thinking for stuff like this, like we're gonna kind of put it into sleep, then we want to wake it up in March. I think it's really great we're tracking stuff at this level. I'm wondering for stuff like this, maybe we want to, I don't know if it has to be carried on every agenda, or if we just want to have some kind of separate thing where we're like a list where we can go, whether it's on the website, where we see, oh yeah, maybe we just want, and also want to just right now just say, we're going to pick this up, you know, first week in March or
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
just
we
put a
can.
dash discussion in March.
Yeah, and we can talk about reformatting the agenda if that's something that you think there's too much tracking on, and we can work on a system where we can track offline, you know, stuff that doesn't have reports, but we're keeping an eye on. If that's something the board wants to do.
Yeah, I don't mind seeing it here. I guess if we start to, it'll be a measure of success if we have more stuff like that, where we've got the stuff planned to come down the road. You know, I guess what I'm thinking is would be cool is, the only reason I think of putting it in a separate spot is so it doesn't, because I ideally like to have those 2 or 3 sentences, you know, like you said, review it in November, here's the plan, so that, like, we don't have to ask you about you were like this, every month we'll ask you, what did we decide about that? So if it's like there,
And at some point, the agenda's going to be 3, 4, 5 pages long, and
if we kept putting this
Yeah.
stuff in, yeah, okay.
so we'll figure something out.
Gotcha. Sounds good.
Okay, Whalum Road Luxury Apartments, update, the zoning board of appeals closed the public hearing, and now they are going to have their discussion on December 10th. So the public hearings are closed, and they'll now have discussion December 10th. So, do you know if that's televised? Are both of theirs televised?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay, so that'll be on TV, or you can go to the meeting, either one. All right, master plan economic development.
Yeah, you know, we had talked at the last meeting about rescheduling the workshop, and I think that that's something that we should probably decide on sooner rather than later. It doesn't necessarily need to be before the new year, but we should have a definitive date so that we can start advertising it, especially if we want to talk about what the vision was from the previous master plan, what the master plan is in general, and then sort of segue that into finalizing the discussion on the economic development element.
Should we have a workshop to try to incorporate the
Yeah,
feedback that we got to date prior to doing a secondary one, just so that we have a revised approach? Because we did collect quite a bit of good feedback and information that I think we could take action on,
if that's what you would like to do.
instead of having a rehash.
We can certainly do that. We can also have a discussion about, we understand that there's these comments that came in, and rather than reworking those in and then reworking additional comments in, say, we've talked about this, let's build on that, rework it all at once. Because, you know, the last workshop was cut short.
Right.
So I think that some of that stuff might go into the plan, and some of it might sort of get weeded out as actual actions as opposed to policy. And we want to try and keep specific or specified actions out of it and leave it sort of on a policy level. And so I hate to keep making changes to it. I'm happy to keep changing it, but I don't want to change it and then find out we've got to take what we put in.
No, understood. If that's the case, then we should try to schedule that follow-up workshop sooner rather than later.
Okay.
'Cause I don't want to keep delaying it, so.
Do we want to shoot for right after the new year? Do you want to try and do it before then?
Do you think if we had it early in December, we would have limited participation?
Yeah,
I don't want to limit participation.
I find December from Thanksgiving to Christmas or to New Year's to be sort of tough. People have family commitments.
I could
they
bring
have
leftovers.
work commitments. Again, I'm here. I'm happy to do it whenever you guys want. I think that, you know, the January doldrums, sometimes people are looking for a reason to get out of the house after the new year. But that's, you know, it can go many different ways.
Okay.
Because I was gonna say we could do the 15th, and then if we wanted to have a hour on village bylaw as well, we could do that, if that becomes our determination. Because that's really the only one left, looking at the calendar.
Well, why don't you
Or
move
we're
it to
first of the
December?
year.
I mean, why don't you move it to January if you
Okay.
think that participation, I don't want to inhibit participation, because I think that's really important.
Did you have a thought, Nathan?
No, I'm fine with either one of those. I'd also be fine, you know, I don't know, I'd had a chance to talk to Adam, and or, I don't know, maybe this was a meeting, but if this is something that you feel like you could deal with productively as an individual engaging with those boards as the planning director, I'd be open to, you know, if the other boards were amenable to that, if you wanted to meet with them and bring back their thoughts. I'm okay with either the workshop or that. I'm pretty flexible. Whatever's going to leave everybody feeling
point.
like, you know, they've provided input and that it's been heard and
Okay.
that everybody understands the process, kind of thing. So
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that if that's what the board would like.
Yeah, that actually might be more efficient
Yes.
Okay.
and less taxing on the individual boards as well.
So what I'll do is I'll try and reach out to them for the economic development portion. Do you also want me to reach out to them on the visioning?
Vision
and
update, yeah,
And the general,
exactly.
this is what a master plan is?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would hit him once.
Okay. And I just want to cover which boards.
Finance was there, sewer was there, selectmen were there.
Is conservation there?
There was no one from conservation.
Open
Was
space?
historic, yeah.
There was no, huh?
Was it historic?
Damon
was
there.
I'm not historic anymore.
Oh, you're not?
Nope.
But yeah, I would include historic, conservation, open space, and that's, all right. And then we could put it on the agenda for January.
Building reuse, maybe.
Well, you can let us know.
Yeah, I'll let you
Where
know
you're at,
when I've
and then
made
we
my
can
way
look at
through all 6 of
January
them.
dates.
Okay.
And then we can look at those dates. Okay, I'm gonna go back into our public hearing.
We find your agenda
Yes, I did.
after you wrote all over mine.
Okay, I am now going to go into the continuation of public hearing. Lunenburg Planning Board will hold a public hearing on October 14th, 2014, 7 PM at the Ritter Memorial Building. The public hearing will be to hear and discuss a special permit and development plan review under Section 4.5 and 8.4 of the protected bylaw of the town of Lunenburg for construction of a 75 kilowatt ground-mounted photovoltaic installation at 322 Flat Hill Road, map 087, parcel 0026. Applicant owner is Michael Conway, 322 Flat Hill Road, Lunenburg, Mass. Materials, as always, are available for viewing at the Planning Office, 960 Massachusetts Ave. And to just, before we go into the hearing, we did get an updated letter from Mr. Conway on November 7th. So that's where we left that. So I think we would go right into that, if Mr. Conway would like to come up and address the letter. Good evening.
Good evening. So thank you once again for your continued efforts in reviewing the application for a special permit. Here we are again. So at the October 27th hearing, the board closed the meeting by sharing their, what I felt was their collective support for the proposed solar project, but qualifying that with expressing serious concern for the butters' opposition. The board implied that the applicant and the abutters should meet offline before the next meeting and work towards an agreement that satisfied both parties. I felt that that was the message the board was sending, was that we feel that this is a good project, but you need to have your neighbors on board. I'm glad to announce that representatives from both parties held a very constructive meeting on November 6, 2014. Although a considerable amount of progress was made on several critical components of an eventual compromise, we were not able to finalize an agreement. At this time, I asked that the board review the following summary of the November 6th discussion points and deliver an order conditioning the special permit in a manner that's consistent with the direction of those negotiations. So, we had a meeting, we talked for just under 2 hours. We weren't able to get all the way there, but I don't know if it was realistic to expect us to get all the way there. Just quick summary of how things went and what we talked about at the meeting, starting at the top here. The discussion was held November 6, 2014, was hosted by Gregory Kelly of 45 Cortlandt Circle and attended by Michael Ramstack of 44 Cortlandt Circle, Michael Conway, that's me, of 322 Flat Hill Road, and 2 trustees of the Flat Hill Village Homeowners Association, Lou and Pam. I didn't get your last name, so I'm sorry. I would have put you in here. The discussion centered around 4 critical pillars of a compromise. Number 1, a scope limitation agreement. Following the 27th meeting, the Ramstack's legal counsel, Kimberly Beeland, proposed that Flat Hill Community Solar execute a legally binding agreement guaranteeing that the solar site would not be expanded in the future. I have fully committed to executing and honoring an agreement with those terms. So one of the main concerns was, the project was brought in front of the planning board at 50 kilowatts, showed up at 75, showed up at 82 on the drawings, and there was considerable amount of concern from the abutters that this project was ballooning. In terms of so their legal counsel suggested, we'll just make up a contract says you're not gonna expand in the future. I said, great. I've been really transparent about the fact that I care about maintaining the character of the neighborhood. I just want to do it in this little 0.3 of an acre spot. Just want to do it once and get out. So I have no issue with doing that. Vegetative screening, the second point. Flat Hill Community Solar would be wholly responsible for installing sufficient screening, present through all 4 seasons. The screening must be installed on the property of 322 Flat Hill Road and must be effective without the support of existing vegetation on abutting parcels. So we discussed again that there is, 150 feet to 250 feet in some areas of existing vegetative buffer, but it's the responsibility of the applicant to provide the sufficient screening, that's acceptable to the abutters. So again, working towards livability, as we discussed in the last meeting. It's important to me that that is satisfactory. I think in the summertime that won't be an issue, but in the wintertime, I think we have a comprehensive plan that satisfies that. Item number 3 is physical location. The physical location of the panels was discussed at length. 3 potential zones were identified throughout the course of the discussion. Zone 1, so then you can reference the diagram that's on the following page. It sort of splits up my yard into thirds, and I call it Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. Zone 1 represents the area where the project is currently proposed. Mr. Kelly and Mr. Ramstack indicated that they'd like to see the project installed in the area labeled Zone 3. Please see Figure 1 for more detail. This is one item that we were not able to reach a final agreement on. So Zone 1, where we're currently proposed, is on the northwest, the back sort of the site. Zone 3 would be, up towards the house, and Zone 2 just a middle in between those two.
And can I ask on that, did you, at the last meeting, say that you would go to Zone 2? Because I know you had said you'd move it up. So were you at Zone 2, or were you still at Zone 1?
Yeah, we didn't specify at that point in time, but Zone 2 is really where I was thinking, let's move it. There's some really good cover that's existing there in Zone 2. It's also not up in the apple trees that sort of I really care about. Mm-hmm. Zone 2 would be really effective to me, in my opinion.
Okay, because currently it was on Zone 1.
Yep, that's where it's proposed.
So you would
per the drawings.
to go to Zone 2?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The last component we talked about was project size and KW. The total size and generation capacity of the project was also discussed at great depth. The special permit application drawings detail a design and installation of an 82 kilowatt DC, 64 kilowatt AC system. So when you change from DC to AC, you have some losses, so the DC is always a little bit bigger than the AC. That's just sort of the way it works. Mr. Kelly and Mr. Ramstack have proposed decreasing the system size to 25 kilowatts. We didn't discuss if that was DC or AC, but I assume that's DC. We were unable to reach a final agreement on this topic. So these are the two we couldn't come all the way together on, was where on the property it was going to be and exactly how big it was going to be. I also put in a noteworthy aside in here, using KW size as a negotiating point, and for that matter, using KW size as the basis for the bylaw is problematic for several reasons. First, although they're linked, KW size does not equate to physical footprint, like how much land it's going to take up. There are a myriad of different available solar module manufacturers and models with widely varying power capacities. So KW is power, and you can get a module that ranges from all sorts of different powers. So, for example, if you go to civicsolar.com, which is just like, hey, I want to put some solar panels on my roof, civicsolar.com. You go in. If you search their database, you can buy a module for 130 watts and a range all the way up to 360 watts per module. They're the same size module. They're the same type solar module. They fit on the same frame, everything. It's just a different make and model. I've proposed to install 9 racks for this project. At the small side, on 130 watt modules, those 9 racks would be a 35 kW system. But use the same 9 racks and switch to that 360 watt module, that's a 97 kilowatt system. It's the same physical footprint. It's the exact same size panels, the exact same orientation of the panels, the same visibility to the neighbors, right? But there's a huge difference. In addition to the modules themselves, module racking systems make a huge difference on the physical footprint as well. I proposed using a system that's called TerraSmart 6x5. So, meaning there's a rack that makes a grid of modules. It's 6 modules wide and it's 5 modules high. That's why it's 9 feet in the back. It's tall. The result is a taller, denser system that takes up less acreage. Other competitive racking systems, like the one you'll see next to Shirley Prison, where the old airport is, they only stack modules 2 high instead of 5 high. So it takes, in those systems, it takes double the acreage to achieve the same KW footprint. All that is to say that although I realize a lot of people worked a lot of long hours on this bylaw, this bylaw doesn't know. It doesn't know about the system size. It doesn't know about the modules. It doesn't even know about the site. And you've all been to the site, and you've seen the site. And this bylaw hasn't seen the site. So this bylaw doesn't know what you know, which is that it's a good site. You know, it's tucked away. There is a lot of woods in between the houses. I have the ability to plant more trees. It's set off the road. It's a good site for a little bit of solar. So another note about the KW size is, furthermore, decreasing the KW size of the project directly decreases the revenue generated. Your KW eventually turns into how much energy you sell, turns into the value of the project. Decreasing the system to 25 kilowatts decreases the value of the project to the point where it's no longer possible to include a satisfactory vegetative screening plan. So if I spend $150,000 on my project, I can afford to spend, even though it's a ton of money on trees, I can afford to spend $10,000 on trees to make that work. If I spend $20,000 on my project, spending $10,000 on trees doesn't work at all. So that's, you know, 2 of the things that are really problematic about using KW size to dictate where we're going with this. What I've got on the next page is what I've titled Middle Ground Proposal. And it's an extension of the negotiations from the meeting that I had with the abutters. It covers the first 2 points that we agreed upon, the legally binding agreement that I will sign. It takes the vegetative screening plan, and with an eye towards livability, I will commit to increasing that by 50%. So if I was already intending to spend $10,000 on planting trees, I'll spend $15,000 on planting trees now. To guarantee that I can line that northern side so you can't see it from Flat Hill Road. The trees will go in at 10 feet. There'll be no buffer time for them to have to grow up. I'll go the whole way. On the third primary pillar of an agreement is project location. The system, I'm proposing to move it into zone 2. I propose zone 1. They'd like to see it in zone 3. Let's put it in zone 2. That's how compromise works, right? The new updated distances to the array are 322 Flat Hill Road, my house, 170 feet from the array. 44 Cortlandt Circle, 380 feet from the array. That's more than double. 45 Cortlandt Circle, 400 feet from the array. Despite all I said about project size not being an effective metric for trying to make a decision here, in the interest of making this project work, and I really want to make this project work, I put my heart into this project. I'm willing to decrease the system capacity of my project as well. So I wanted to put in 75 kilowatts. They said that they'd be okay stomaching 25. And if it comes to that, although I don't think it should come to that because I don't think KW is a reasonable thing to negotiate on, but if it's the only thing that'll get it done, I'll decrease it to 50 kilowatts, which is a third of what I was proposing to put in. Classified yourself as a capitalist, you can imagine that's going to hurt. But to get this project done, I'll do that. Because despite, unfortunately, how I think the project has been depicted in a lot of ways, it's not a cash grab situation for me. I care about this. I do care about the neighborhood. And I'm not an absentee land baron conglomerate who needs to be toppled by the neighbors. That's not, I live in that little 1,300 square foot house on the road. That's me. And I care about getting this project done. So I urge the planning board to consider this proposal as a fair and true compromise between the two positions, and to conditionally approve the special permit contingent upon modifications detailed above. That's all for now. I've also included on the last 3 pages an ambient noise analysis that speaks to how loud the inverters are going to be. There's some pretty heavy math on the first couple pages, but the idea is the inverter manufacturer specifies how much sound it makes at the inverter when you put your ear up to it, and then we've also extrapolated that using the attenuation formulas on the 3rd page. We've pulled that out to how loud it'll be at the property line. And it goes from at the actual inverter, on this table that refers to common sounds. It goes from 49 dB, which equates to light traffic or a refrigerator, if you have your ear against it, and then pulled out to the property line. Depending on the frequency and the humidity, you're down to 20 dB, which equates to rustling leaves, 30 dB, a whisper, or 40 dB, babbling brook or a computer. So that is, and there's some links on the back. There's one report prepared by the Mass CEC, the Clean Energy Collective, I think Collective or Compact, which was a study of the sound made by large solar projects, but that's sort of not applicable because the type of inverters are different. They make that really high-pitched hiss, which is not what string inverters do. So, thank you.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question. Thanks, first of all, thanks for putting all this together. It was really well presented. Question for you about the inverter and the sound. So how many inverters are there in the proposed project?
For the full project, the full-size project, there would be 8.
8. Okay, and is this, so the noise calculations, are these for a single one of the 8 or for all 8?
For each, yeah. For
Okay.
each. They noteworthy that they're all not located in the same location. Don't have drawings.
In the design, are they located, are they attached to the rack?
Yeah,
or-
they sit under the rack, so they're sort of like distributed among the racks, right? So you have an inverter that corresponds to like every 2 racks you have an inverter or so. So they're not all sort of sat together. They're sort of distributed throughout the array.
Okay, and this is measured in you're showing the measurement at the property line, 30 feet from the inverter, and under a different range of conditions. That's good. I'm not an expert in acoustics or sound at all. In the worst case scenario, 50% humidity there. It looks like, I don't know, so it's 43 decibels compared to 49 decibels? Is that should that be compared kind of linearly? It's...
Unfortunately, no. It's the decibels are on the logarithmic scale, so it's kind of got that whoop, swoop in it.
Okay, so it's significantly quieter.
Well, that's why for each of the results, I've put the common sound comparison next to them.
I gotcha.
Just so you have something tangible to hold on to.
So how does that go? If we looked at that, I'd be, thanks for putting something together here. And so this is great to, have a conversation. How does that, as a function of distance, how would these numbers look? If you went from 30 to 60, how would you expect those numbers to change? Maybe if I looked more closely at their formulas, I could figure that out. But
yeah, pretty significantly. So, all right, the E function.
Yep.
So a lot of these, the formula has the new amplitude dBA is equal to the original amplitude times E raised to negative alpha times the Z. Z is the distance. So I use 30 feet in the calculations. 30 feet is 9.144 meters. So in each of these formulas that are drawn out, you have 9.144 meters being multiplied by some coefficient for the frequency and the humidity that says how fast the air molecules are bouncing off of one another. But essentially, if you were to take that 9.144 meters and increase it, you would be increasing the exponential number that the E is being raised to, which is a negative value. So your final number, taking the first example, that 11.33 dB, if you were to increase 9.144, your product for this exponentially raised number would increase, right? Because you're increasing one of the numbers in the product. Because it's a negative number, the E itself would decrease. So that 49 decreases even further. So right now, the 49 decreases all the way to 11. If you make 9 bigger, it decreases past 11.
So I guess, as you double the distance, what do you think what do you think the impact is going to be on? So if you go from 30 to 60 or 9 to 18 or whatever, do you think that 11 becomes, do you have a ballpark? I don't know.
Yeah, I can follow up with something, or in the time when I sit down, I can just throw it in the calculator real quick and.
Yeah, whatever. At some point that'd
but
be cool.
it is logarithmic, so I would expect it to be drastic. 50 feet, would that be a good?
It'd be interesting to see how it works on a range of feet. The other thing with these cases is you're changing the kilohertz.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what is that a measurement of?
The tone of the sound. So
does it emit on all these
would be-
frequencies?
Yeah,
Or-
frequencies.
So does it emit does a single inverter emit simultaneously across 2.5, 5, and 10?
Yeah, so the inverter the tone it makes has 3 harmonics.
Okay.
Which means it has a base frequency and then 2 other frequencies sitting on top of it, so like this multi-tonal thing.
Okay.
And that's what I
I
was
see.
trying to. So you
So
can.
it's really one case, but for the 3 sounds. So technically, the comparison would be you're hearing a pin dropping, a whisper, and a babbling brook, kind of all at once, all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, this is. I didn't write this in here, but this is when the inverter is humming, right? So an inverter doesn't make any noise at night because the sun's not out and it's not on.
Okay, gotcha.
So this is in the middle of the day from 12 to 3 when you've got all the electronics and the transformer inside of the inverter are really working hard. That'll ramp up in the morning hours, and then it'll sort of taper off in the evening, and then at night, dead silence.
So another question. Sorry, I'm almost done.
No,
Sure. Yeah, go nuts.
So how cost feasible? How cost feasible is it to have the inverters located sort of separately from the rest of the system? If that, let's say you put together a table showing distances, and distance makes a big difference, and you put it in X place in your yard, nobody hears it.
Yep.
Is that something that's doable? Can they be separated from the panels and racking system?
Yeah, you can put it wherever you want. I mean, as far away as you're willing to engineer and then spend money on the additional wire to get it there. But at the size that we're dealing with, because these are really small inverters, we're talking about like really small wire. You just go to the aisle in Home Depot and it's the Romex you pull down off the shelf, like the number 14, number 12 Romex.
Gotcha. So would it be a fair interpretation of what you're saying to say there could potentially be a lot of flexibility without a lot of cost impact to relocate to those to a ideal position or whatever?
No doubt, yeah.
Okay.
And one thing one consideration we do try to keep in mind is heat. So usually, a rack, a module rack, is, it's like 2 feet off the ground in the front, and then it goes up to 9 feet, and it faces south because the panels like to see the sun. We're in the northern hemisphere, sun coming from the south. So the panels face that way, and the back of the panels faces north, and it's like moss grows on the north side, right? So the shady side is always on the north. We try to, because these things, they're one of the primary components of the system, to extend their life a little bit, we like to put them behind a rack because it's in the shade all day. So, more of a concern in Southern California where we do work, when it's like we're in the desert, it's really beating down on it. Up here, it's not too much of a concern. We can even build like a shade structure if it was really far away from the inverters if it was really far away from the array, we could do that as well. There's a lot of flexibility in what we, to mitigate this. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for explaining.
Yeah, sure.
So, your calculations are great, thanks.
Welcome.
One thing that you did leave out, though, that you might have considered is what's the impact of the visual barrier on the sound? So you're going to have all of this vegetation buffer between these inverters and your neighboring property, but you didn't take that into consideration.
It's not considered here, yeah. I think in a lot of cases, it's good to, in engineering studies, to give worst case scenario, and then anything better is icing, you know? If we happen to have evergreen trees too deep that are, you know, that are cascaded in accordance with the type of screening plan that we're looking to install here, yeah, those evergreen trees knock that sound right down, for sure.
I mean, it sounds like we're trying to hide the sound of 8 PCs running is kind of the way I boil this down.
Yeah, yeah.
And so if I put 8 PCs out in the middle of a field and I turned them on and I walked away, how good would I hear them? That's kind of the way and if I put them behind a couple rows of trees too. So I know my hearing's not that good, but I can understand
agree
it.
with
So
that.
thank you very much.
Well, I look at the charts and I just say, are they going to hear them?
No. No.
That's no matter what, you know, you tell me a pin drop, a computer, are the neighbors going to hear the hum, the noise from any of the solar panel?
Not only is it, and I understand, like, the eye rolling just from me saying no, I get it, but not only is it my opinion, but in the calculations back that up, really. They do. So, unfortunately, there's been some, my engineering acumen has been in question more than once at these meetings. Not that I appreciate that, but these calculations do back that up.
And they will not hear it?
No.
Well, yeah, I mean, technically, by his own calculations, if they're
Right.
standing on their property line, they'll hear, you know, the computers aren't in the middle of the field. The computer's on the property line, basically, according to the calculation.
They're 30 feet away behind 2 rows of trees.
And that's if they're
Right, but
located
the
in the
calculation's
back
already
row.
factored in the distance and is measuring the decibels at the property line.
So another thing, I use 30 feet, 9 meters for all these. That's assuming, you know, right off the bat that every inverter is located in the closest row to the property line.
Gotcha.
So not only can we move the inverters, just like put them in the woods on the other side, but probably more realistically, you just put them in the front row. And that buys you an extra, that probably doubles, it probably buys you an extra 30, 40 feet.
Gotcha.
And then you're off and running from there. If it's louder, then you move them again, but I think that's probably enough to hear absolute silence.
Any other questions for him?
No, I'm glad to hear that you worked with the abutters, and I'm anxious to hear what they have to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you reached out to them. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, please.
Good evening. My name is Doug Troyer. I represent Michael and Mary Ellen Ramstack. One of my associates was here, Kim Beelan, last weekend.
Oh, okay.
She's actually in sunny Florida on a
for her.
much-deserved vacation. I wish I was with her. First off, I'd like to thank Adam Burney for supplying us with information. I actually didn't get Mr. Conway's letter that outlines his settlement proposal until today. I also didn't get the peer review until today, and thank you very much for taking the time to scan and fax that to us. It allows me to give you my position tonight, and I appreciate that. I think I'm first going to start with Mr. Conway's explanation of the settlement meeting. I think first off, last week when Ms. Beelan appeared before this board, she did indicate that we had actually just received, I think that day as well, a substantial filing in which he had that we didn't have an opportunity to review. And it wasn't until after we were able to review that that we had a better idea of what he was really looking for. We actually, I think she suggested that it may make sense, hey, we're always for people sitting down and trying to talk and see if there's a way in which you can work out your resolution or your dispute. And in fact, Mr. Conway had conversations with prior abutters, but there was just never any real meetings of the minds. And it came to last week where we all thought it may make sense to, hey, let's sit down, let's see what it looks like. I think this board was definitely on board with, hey, the butters are definitely opposing this. Let's see if they can actually sit and talk about it. We actually did sit down. I actually wasn't present. We made a decision that it made sense for the neighbors without legal counsel being present. I didn't want to, I wanted the neighbors to basically sit down and talk about issues, and they did hold a meeting. One of the abutters, I think Mr. Kelly, held it at his house. There was another abutter there by Pam Nolan. I think one of the trustees from the Flat Hill Flat Hill Community Association was present, as well as Michael Ramstack. The meeting was very professional. It was very, I think the parties were able to discuss their disputes, but unlike Mr. Conway's suggestion that we basically plowed through everything and only had 2 remaining issues, I think that is disingenuous to say to this board. There is a clear concern about the location of the solar farm. It is 30 feet off the property line from my client's property. It's unclear as I sit here tonight, or I stand here tonight, as to whether or not has he reduced his proposal to 50 tonight? Is he at 72? Is he at 82? Or is he at 50 where he was before the Zoning Board of Appeals a month ago? I don't know where he is tonight on his proposal. I heard something along the lines that he may be amenable to reducing it to 50 if this board would condition that, but I'm not sure if that's the case or not. That was not something at the settlement meeting that was discussed either. Mr. Conway took the position that he would relocate the solar farm to Zone 2 if the board if my clients and the other parties who were present would agree to allow it to stay at 75 kilowatts. That was not something which they agreed to do. Plus, there seems to be an issue with that location being in the wetlands, whereby is it even possible to locate that 75 kilowatt solar farm into that area? I don't know the answer to that. There was also the discussion that if we were trying to reduce it to 25 kilowatts, which is more than what you can do as of right, you can keep it in that location, but we're looking for some substantial screening. Mr. Conway took the position that, my understanding is Mr. Conway took the position that the only way in which he would agree to reduce it would be if he could keep it at I don't think there was an agreement to reduce it. There was an agreement to move it and keep it at 75 kilowatts to Zone 2, but never an agreement to reduce it to 50 when we walked out of that meeting on November 6th. There was also no discussions, trying to see what else he talks about, increasing the vegetation screening to 50%. That was not something that was on the table when we walked out of that room. There was no discussion about limiting the size to 50 kilowatts, and it wasn't until we actually read that letter this morning or this afternoon when Mr. Burney forwarded it to me that we realized that, hey, maybe there's still a possibility for settlement discussions, but we have a problem at this point because he had from November 6th until he sent the letter on November 7th, and even could have waited until today to re-communicate with us. Ms. Beelan had email communications with him. He obviously knew phone numbers for other people and did not get back to us to let us know that these were actually on the table. What we were told when we left that meeting was, well, we can't come to an agreement, so I'm going to go before the board, do the best I can, and I'll do a straw vote. If they basically look like they're going to decline it, I'm going to withdraw it, and then I'm going to put my 10 kilowatt on the property. We said that's unfortunate, but I guess that's what we have to do. And that's how we left the meeting. There was no discussion whatsoever about these proposals in which he has just now brought to this board's attention. And I think that is unfortunately a sign of how he is negotiating these deals with the abutters and keeping the abutters out of the loop on certain things. Getting to the issues. I think Mr. Lockwood made very good points, not only in your letter to the editor, but also on October 27th, wherein you indicated that there is a statute. There is a statute in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that basically states that, yes, solar farms are preferred. And there is a statute that stands for the proposition that no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems or the building of structures that facilitate the collection of solar energy except where necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Well, fortunately, the town of Lunenburg has established reasonable regulations. Your zoning bylaw is a reasonable regulation. You have put in certain regulations for a 10 kilowatt. Anything 10 or less is a small project. You can do it as of right. However, you got to go to building commissioner. Building commissioner can look at it and determine if screening is necessary and some other items. Even though it's as of right, there's still certain conditions that the property owner must go through. Anything over 50 kilowatts is a large scale process. And in the large scale process, you have a buffer of 200 feet, not only for the setbacks, but also just a buffer. This is a project, and you also have reasonable regulations limiting this to a 20-acre site. This is a site that's on 13.1 acres. This is a site that is 35 feet off the abutting property line. This is a site that is surrounded by residential properties that are within 200 feet. And he's basically utilizing the buffer of other people's properties, which my clear reading of the bylaw doesn't allow for. He has to have 200 feet on his property of a buffer. He's talking about noise tonight and submits today a noise report without forwarding it to us, knowing that we are basically representing the Ramstacks, and we've had communications with them to allow me to maybe talk with somebody about whether or not these calculations are actually feasible. I have no idea. I haven't had a chance to talk to a noise impact expert. I didn't hear him indicate that he went to school to be educated on noise impact analysis. He's basically went to the website, he's pulled down certain information, has basically found that 49 whatever the calculation, 49 BPWs or whatever it is basically what one will basically sound like. Then you take 8 of those, what's that calculation? Not only is he just taking a generic number saying that one of these is going to be 89 kilowatts times 8, but you're not taking into effect the land, you're not taking into effect, as you mentioned, there is trees there. Would that lessen the sound? Would it increase the sound? What's the elevation? What's the surrounding areas where noise comes in? Do people currently hear traffic going along the main road there? Is it, because if this is 8 systems that are basically producing 49, whatever the calculation is, and it sounds like passing traffic, that seems a lot to me. I understand he's basically said, my opinion is they will not hear anything. I don't think that representation can be quantified without some sort of expert analysis. Going back to my point about how the statute has basically provides that there you should allow for solar farms, but you have to have reasonable regulation. There's a case law that actually went in front of Judge Sands in the land court just in 2014. I think Ms. Beal had mentioned it last week. It was a case where town of Marion restricted solar farms in residential areas. The zoning board of appeals found, the land court found that it was reasonable for the town of Marion to restrict solar farms in such an area. It's a little different than this case. This case, these are allowed in residential areas. However, you have a bylaw that, from what I've heard from listening to the hearing on October 27th, was painstakingly done. And specifically, the buffer was something in which was called into play when putting together that bylaw. And here we have a solar farm being placed 35 feet off a property line. He's looking for a variance, he's looking for some sort of waiver from this board to allow not only 35 feet, which is, there's no justification. He hasn't indicated why his farm has to go there. He hasn't given us any justification. He basically indicates that, hey, I'll put it to zone 2, but I believe there's wetland issues. So to make that representation without saying I can do that, it just doesn't make sense. There's no dimensional, there's no zoning calculations, there's no nothing on his plans that allow me to actually take a look and figure out exactly how far everything is off. I believe that his plans in which have been submitted are deficient as are identified in a memorandum. I won't bore you and go through each and every one of them, but there are substantial deviations from what is required to be submitted that has not been submitted. We believe that his project is a substantial detriment to the public good. And by allowing this to go forward, you're basically taking a situation where there's really, you talked about a gray area. Well, it's not really a gray area. It's, you have a small scale, you got a large scale. If someone wants to go to town meeting and change the bylaw, so be it. But unfortunately, you have a bylaw that is specific. And right now, I have not seen evidence that would allow this board to make a finding that allowing a solar farm of this size on a 13.1 acre, which the zoning board has granted, Mind you, it's a special permit dimensional variation, which I believe at the end of the day, he's going to need a variance. I don't believe that's going to do it for him to get to 13.1 acres. He has no relief before this board tonight that I've heard requesting, relief from the 200-foot setback for the side yard or rear yard, whatever this is, or 200-foot the buffer that's required to surround the entire solar farm. I haven't heard anything about that. The only thing I heard tonight from Mr. Conway is that he went to a meeting and he's happy to report that we talked, but we're unwilling to negotiate with him further, so therefore condition his special permit on making us come to some sort of agreement, which at this point, without all the parties involved, and I only represent the Ramstacks at this point, I don't see an agreement being reached, given the fact that we sat down with him and he turns around, sends a letter to the board that relays information that was not disclosed to us, and then comes before the board on Monday night and relays that information, acting as if he has been a good guy. I stress to you that because of that action, Mr. Ramstack, Mrs. Ramstack have no interest in having any further conversations with him about settlement. With that, I would respectfully request that you, as was mentioned in your bylaws, there is substantial issues here relating to the project is not located in the appropriate location. It doesn't comply with the 200-foot or the 200-foot strip or the setbacks. It's a commercial enterprise in a residential neighborhood. It will impact the surrounding residential neighborhoods via views, noise, rural character of the neighborhood, and devalue the homes. And the project creates an attractive nuisance to which no protection has been identified to protect it against children going into that area to play with these solar systems or anything. My last comment is the peer review in which you received notes that a condition should go on this property to allow for emergency access. This is in the way back part of the field. There's no road getting there. There is no way, given this project, an emergency vehicle during the snow with 2 feet of snow or a foot of snow can get to that area. And he hasn't proposed anything to address that. With the ZBA, I believe that there's an open issue. My reading of the ZBA special permit, 50 kilowatts. It is clear in that decision that it's 50 kilowatts. There's nothing in that decision that states that it's for over 50 kilowatts. It's 50 kilowatts. If he wants a 72 or an 82 or whatever, whenever he decides what he wants, if it's over 50, he's got to go back to the ZBA. And unfortunately, he's looking at heavy opposition at this point due to his actions. Thank you very much.
I have some questions. What is your interpretation of our special permit? Because that's what he's applying under.
Your special permit,
So I just want to understand.
my
your
interpretation of special permit is that under 1415 he can seek a special permit for a large-scale ground-mounted solar system. However, the board shall find that a permit may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent and the purpose of this bylaw. It goes through the specific requirements, which this board is well aware of, to which I don't believe he has met. In connection with the setbacks and buffer strips, buffer strip, in all districts, a ground-mounted installation shall be surrounded by a buffer strip which shall be 200 feet in depth in a residential, conservation, or recreational district, and shall be 50 feet in the commercial or industrial district unless it abuts a residential, conservation, or recreational district, in which case the buffer strip shall be 200 feet in depth along such abutting lot lines. Unless the applicant can demonstrate and the planning board finds that adequate buffering can be provided in a narrow strip.
I'm sorry, I know the.
Yeah, my understanding is that he doesn't meet the
Definition of
200-foot buffer strip.
Okay.
Then the setbacks, side yard must be 200 feet, front yard must be 200 feet. Doesn't meet that either. Those are the main objections that I have on the special permit with regard to the buffering. I also have objections that it's the nuisance, I believe it's not nuisance, but the noise, the other areas in which I have identified it, I believe do not meet the criteria that the site is an appropriate location. I believe that you're looking at a situation where he has to go back to the ZBA. While the ZBA is granted on 13.1, it's a moot issue at this point. He can do it on a 13.1, apparently pursuant to the ZBA's decision. However, he must meet this planning board's criteria in finding that it will not adversely affect the existing neighborhood, it won't affect the scenic views, won't affect the rural character, public safety, and granting a special permit will not reasonably diminish the available light, air, sunlight. There will be no nuisance or serious hazards to vehicles or pedestrians. We believe, as I've indicated, the buffering, the location, your bylaws are written to protect and have that buffer. There's been no explanation to this board why it has to be in that location when he has a substantial amount of land back there. He's proposed 3 different zones, Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. That was part of apparently a discussion. Zone 2 I only think is possible. Zone 3 is closer to his property, so he doesn't want it there, which I would understand. My clients don't want it closer to theirs either. So it is an issue. The solar bylaws were implemented to have those buffers in order to protect residential people. And I believe this is if he was looking for 150 feet instead of 200 feet, that's a different situation. He's looking for 35 feet for a 200-foot buffer, and he's relying upon my client to maintain his property in the woodsy and not develop or do anything further there. That would take away and have a real, and I'm not sure if my client can do this, I haven't done the zoning analysis, but maybe there's a possibility that my client could develop that area and truly be 35 feet off that property line, where the noise at that point, even within 50 feet, you're going to hear at least at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Actually, I have 2 questions for you. So, to your knowledge, what size solar energy system does the state declare as a large-scale solar?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware of what the state
Okay, so you haven't looked up the
declares
state
No,
regulations?
to be honest with you, I'm in front of you
That's
guys,
okay.
and I care about the bylaw. I don't care about the state requirements at this time.
All right. And just, again, from your knowledge perspective, given that this is not over 250 kilowatts, what is the negative impact to public health, safety, or welfare of this site?
Well, the impact, as I have indicated, is it's going to have an impact on views. It's
No,
going to
but
have an impact on
Public
noise.
health, safety, or
Well,
welfare?
the noise is potentially could be a health issue. Also, there are children in the Flat Hill community area to which there has been no protections put on place to protect. In fact, he's gone so far as to say, I do not want to put a fence around it. I'm sure he'll stand up now and say he'll do that. But there hasn't been any consideration as to protecting against what he is creating is a solar farm in the middle of this field where it's going to attract children, like it or not.
Is it your assertion that a solar array in general presents a safety hazard to children?
Oh, no, I don't present that at all. What I'm saying is there's a possibility of that, and there hasn't been any. I'm sure there could be a solar array that is put in an appropriate location, that is not surrounded by a residential neighborhood, that actually meets your bylaws, that could actually be in place that does not cause a safety hazard. This causes a safety hazard. Because of its location, it's not an appropriate location.
So, again, I'm trying to qualify what the safety hazard is. You're saying it's unsafe for children to be around, is that?
I'm saying there's a possibility that that could be one of the safety hazards. I also foresee that this could have a safety impact on its neighbors to have losing their scenic views as well as not being able to sleep at night because of the unquantified noise that could come from this humming facility that's going to be placed 35 feet from their property line. Whether their house is 260 feet away or not, it's 35 feet from their property line. And they have a absolute right to be protected from certain nuisances from this and hope that this planning board would follow its bylaws in ruling to protect them from such issues.
All right, so I think you've answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Damon, Nathan, you all set?
More public comment?
Yeah. I wanted to make sure we were all set before we go. Any public comment? I'm going to ask on public comment because this is our 3rd hearing. Let's not repeat the same things that we've said the last 2. Just let's present any new information that we have because we have done 2 public hearings already. So please come up with any new hearings you want to have with us. Absolutely. Sure.
Oh yeah, I'm Chuck Kortemash. I'm at 41 Cortlandt Circle. And so I'd say the things that sort of bothered me about this from the beginning is I feel that the word here is disingenuous. And the reason I feel that way is just based on what I've seen and read. all from documents from Mr. Conway, also from, just watching the zoning board videos and so forth and so on. A couple things that jumped out at me in particular, and this is by no means a character assassination anyway, but what it is though is we're being asked to take him at his word on a lot of stuff. None of us here are solar experts, besides Mr. Conway, of course. But really what he has done, and what the attorney just referenced, is pulled a bunch of things off a website that maybe we should take a look at, but at the same time, none of us have. So we are being asked to take him at his word. And so, one of the comments that I saw originally was there was an opposition on our behalf to having a commercial entity on Flat Hill. And we had said it's not the appropriate place for that. So what the response was to that was that there are already commercial entities on Flat Hill Road, and what was listed off is a horse farm, an apple orchard, and a syrup business. And I found it was disingenuous to say there are already commercial entities there as if there's a Flat Hill Mall, because there's not. I think that honestly, this isn't just an issue for our area. It's really an issue for the town. I think this would be the beginning of the proverbial slippery slope, if you will. I think that, it feels like every time there's an open piece of land in town, you can count on someone trying to put a solar farm up at this point. And I do think that people come and choose to live in Lunenburg because it's a nice, quiet town with a good school system, and it's rural. And I think people like that. And so I think people like the picturesque landscape. So I think, keeping in line with disingenuous as well, he had said earlier this is not a cash grab. I don't see how it isn't. In fact, there was a letter from his fiance that actually referenced the fact that this is money that's going to go toward their children's college funds potentially, or savings. And while they're not going to get rich off of it, there's a money element to that. And that letter was addressed to us in the village. So, again, not a character assassination by any way, but certainly, it's concerning to me when it's brought up that, we're being asked to take him at his word. And, here's a bylaw that was really well thought out, and it was meant to protect the interests of our town and really represent the people who live here. And, people worked hard on those bylaws, and they took a lot of things into consideration. And now we're sort of setting the precedent of letting folks come in and disregard those laws or and take it into their own account. Certainly bylaws get changed, frequently. But in this case, I just feel that, again, the thing is it's been disingenuous from the beginning, and as you just heard from the attorney, with letters being, distributed sort of last minute, and I wasn't present for the negotiations, so I can't speak to the meeting that occurred. But, last thing I'll say is, in the one of the early on meetings, which Conway was asked, early on if this was to gain revenue for himself, his answer was not entirely. And, again, I don't think that's a very, genuine answer to give if it isn't, in fact, to gain revenue. I would almost rather him just stand up here and say this is strictly for money. It would make more sense to me, rather than go through the rigmarole of, how this is good for the environment and so forth and so on. So, if for me, I would say, if this is something you really feel powerful about and passionate about, you could put solar panels on your roof. That would be an option as well, and it wouldn't impact the community. But clearly there's a lot of opposition here today, to show our concerns. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Good evening. Again, my name's Greg Kelly. I live at 45 Cortlandt Circle. Again, I just want to thank the board for the opportunity to speak, and thank you again for your time tonight. Most importantly, I guess I want to address a few different aspects of the purpose behind the meeting that we had with Mr. Conway at my residence late last week, and some of the particulars that we discussed, quite frankly, rebutting some of the points that he's asserted in his letter. First of all, understand the context. If for me, quite honestly, I really wasn't that interested in talking with him. However, in the spirit of being respectful, open-minded, neighborly, and quite honestly, the biggest factor in my mind was I felt that there was a request from the board that we talk. And I understood why that was being conveyed to us as neighbors and abutters. And I respect that. And obviously you put a lot of time into this and hearing our concerns, and I'm willing to listen to the board's direction in terms of what you would ask of us, and it was reasonable for us to meet with him. But having said that, clearly what he's indicated in his letter, That's not what I gathered from our meeting. Now, there's some things that are accurate, there are others that are not. I guess, first of all, I was disappointed to learn that he wrote the letter, and he didn't copy me or Mike Ramstad or Pam Nolan or Lou, our trustee who was present. He didn't copy us on that. For me, if I were writing a letter summarizing events that occurred with other people, I would copy them on that. I would be transparent. What I would be doing is citing the facts and the context behind it. But I learned about this letter, frankly, at about 5 or 5:30 this evening, and it has certainly undermined the gist of the conversation that we had the other night, which we walked away from it, at least in my mind, agreeing to disagree and to be neighbors and to be civil with one another, and we had a very civil and amicable conversation. But this is simply not accurate. So let me just give you a few highlights of how I take issue with and disagree with what Mr. Conway's asserted here. I guess to kind of set the tone, and I won't spend much time on this at all, but initially in his opening paragraph where he summarizes you, the board, as, quote, sharing their collective support for the proposed solar project. I mean, obviously, as everyone knows, there was a discussion that each of you had kind of giving us an informal position of what your concerns were and where you stood. And I'm almost a little hesitant to do this, but I mean, certainly there was at least one board member who indicated at that point he was inclined to oppose the project because of, obviously, a number of concerns, and we respected and appreciated that. By its mere fact here, for him to summarize that as saying that he's referring to it as your collective support, I was a little perplexed by that statement. So it kind of set the tone as I read through his letter. But then he talked about us, quote, we were not able to finalize an agreement. We weren't anywhere near finalizing an agreement. And he's made some assertions in here related to some different things that we discussed. First of all, in the interest of time, I'll jump over his point number 1 here in his letter, but basically he talks about the vegetative screening. We certainly did have discussion about buffering and trees and so forth, but I think we had a different position walking away from that. Regardless, though, actually, I'll jump ahead. Project location. We talked extensively about the location of the project. And for him, he indicated that if he was to move the project from Zone 1 in his diagram here in this letter dated November 7 to Zone 3, which is in close proximity to his residence, he would only agree to that if he was able to have the full size of his project, the 75 or arguably 82 kilowatt. In the interest of trying to have a productive conversation, and this is a major point here, we said early on that we would discuss a hypothetical of if, for example, we were willing to go along with a 15 to 25 kilowatt system. What we were trying to do was, and I made it very clear to you, Mr. Conway, that I was not saying that I would consent to a 25 kilowatt system, as you will recall. But what I indicated was that, again, in the interest of trying to have a productive conversation, let's talk about it in that capacity, that if we were to agree that we would not oppose a 25 kilowatt system, would he be willing to move to that location? And he indicated that he would not. As a matter of fact, actually what I told him was that for me, that's still 2.5 times what, according to the bylaw, classifies as a large-scale solar project in a residential area. And I indicated that in my mind, maybe I would have agreed to a 15 kilowatt. And I asked how much output he could produce by having panels on his roof, as you'll recall, and you indicated that you could generate approximately 6 kilowatts by having panels on your roof. And I indicated that in my mind, that would come out of the amount that we were talking about and potentially would discuss maybe agreeing to. So long story short, I never agreed to consent to a 25 kilowatt system, and I definitely object to him implying to the board that I did so. And that also goes to what my neighbor Chuck was saying, what the attorney has said tonight and others related to the nature of the communication with Mr. Conway. Quite frankly, it's difficult to read a letter like this and to listen to his comments, which he's asserting as fact, and to trust him. And he's taking things out of context. Again, I'm going to try and be brief. So some of the other things that were said, he stated just a short time ago in his discussion with you that they said, quote unquote, that we'd agreed to the 25 kilowatt system. We never did that. He also indicated, let me see here. Well, you know, we had discussion about how you measure the output from the solar panels, and he was trying to argue that we should not be looking at it in terms of kilowatts, that we should be looking at it in this other manner. And I guess, you know, for me, the bylaws refer to it in the matter of kilowatts. I think we should be referring to it in kilowatts. There should be no deviation from that. The law is the law. And in any event, so I certainly never agreed to that. His statement here in the second page, the last paragraph, he says, furthermore, decreasing the KW size of the project directly decreases the revenue generated. Decreasing the system to 25 KW decreases the value of the project to the point where it's no longer possible to include a satisfactory vegetative screening plan. Well, I got to tell you, if it's not going to be satisfactory to him, I'm sure it's not going to be satisfactory to us. And whether or not he feels he can afford to expend the resources to put in an appropriate buffer, if he doesn't get the full size of the project that he wants, that's not our problem. He's required to meet certain bylaws, and clearly here he's indicating that he can't do that. He referred to this proposal as being a, quote, middle ground proposal. Well, again, I don't view it, first of all, as middle ground. I live across the street from Mr. Ramstick. I'm in close proximity to Mr. Conway's proposed project, and I certainly don't agree to it, and I don't view it as being middle ground. Also, we had further discussion about, again, as I mentioned before, the location of the project, and we were asking, why not move it into what's labeled here as Zone 3, closer to his residence? And what he indicated early on during our meeting on the 6th was that he wanted to reserve that property for basically his family. He stated that at some point he might decide to put a pool in. He wanted to have an area where his kids would play. And that was the basis that he was giving for not putting it there. Well, obviously on the other side, so if you visualize the lot, you know, obviously he's putting it on the side close to our properties, which he argues keeps it further away from the tree line. Well, obviously on the other side, closer to the tree line, in close proximity to his residence, he could put a pool there. He could have his children play there. The underlying issue here is that, as he mentioned before, he said to you that he didn't want to look at it. His fiancée said that it was a monstrosity. It's very clear that the reason why he wants to put it back toward our homes is because he doesn't want to look at his project, and we shouldn't be expected to. So, I may have some additional comments that I would want to say later on. Actually, I do want to get back to a couple more points too. The noise study, there's been several conversations relative to that. I have to tell you, again, I have no confidence in Mr. Conway's facts. Time and time again, I'm seeing inaccurate facts being put forth by him, poor information, inadequate information. In terms of the breakdown that he has provided here about what he anticipates the noise levels to be, I don't trust that. And I don't think it's unreasonable that if you were to consider his project reasonably, that you would require that an independent, objective, trustworthy firm conduct a noise impact study. And obviously, he's yet to do anything along those lines. Now, lastly, Mr. Chenis, you had mentioned, you were asking about children, and you were asking about, well, more specifically, potential health risks to the neighborhood and so forth. Again, I live in close proximity to this project. I have a 6.5-year-old son. When I purchased my home in this area, obviously there was no talk about a potential solar project. My son's safety, in essence, is in your hands. I should not have to worry about him going over into this solar farm and potentially being harmed. Now, when we met with Mr. Conway, he had mentioned to us that he brought up, or we discussed, wiring, and he said that some wires would be above the ground. And again, you know, obviously this is generating a tremendous amount of electricity. I have concerns about, you know, my son's welfare. Obviously, my neighbor, Mr. Ramstack, he has grandchildren. As you go down the Cortlandt Circle, again, in close proximity, a number of my neighbors have young children. Our children walk down the street to get to the bus stop at the end, or I should say at the intersection of Cortlandt Circle and Flat Hill. They're going to be in that proximity. So, in any event, he has given us no assurances that obviously our children will be safe. So, I guess in closing, I would ask that you deny his application. I think this has gone on for quite some time. He certainly has been given much more due process than we were ever given, because again, we weren't provided notice initially. And so I would ask that you deny his application respectfully, and I would ask that you do it tonight. You know, the bylaws are the bylaws. The law is the law. He's trying to circumvent the law. I think case law, as the attorney has cited, you know, obviously supports our position. And, you know, frankly, the bylaws exist for a reason. They're very reasonable. And for him to come to you asking that you grant this special permit when he has approximately 30 feet of buffer from my neighbor's house as opposed to the required 200, that 200-foot buffer is there for a reason. It's to protect us to some extent from the noise, from the view, from the potential harm to our children, etc. That is a substantial deviation from what the bylaw requires. And I would ask that you respectfully adhere to that. And also, like I said before, I'm just concerned about the precedent sense for our community. We love our community. We love where we live. And, you know, this case is going to be watched. The implications will certainly go beyond the implications in our neighborhood. And I would just encourage you to apply the law.
Thank you. Any other?
I just have a one-by-one responses and some stuff to fire back. First of all, protection of children. I don't think there could be anything more important than that, right? So let's address that first. There will be some exposed wires on the solar site, just like an extension cord. They're certified by the same certifying entity, Underwriters Laboratory, UL, that your toaster is certified. They're all certified for safety, for the installation ratings that they have. The entire solar facility is designed and regulated and will be checked by the wiring inspector of Lunenburg for compliance with the National Electric Code, which is the safety of everything. Every building that's built, solar farms, you know, pump stations, anything that has electricity in it. This system is going to be safe to the touch. You'll be able to walk up to it and touch it. I would advise people not to do that and to not have children play on my property. But, you know, I invite people to come use the land in the back, certainly. But just like with transformers on the side of the road, you know, underground developments like Cortlandt Circle, they have underground transformers sitting in a little turtle shell on the side of the road. If you tamper with that, it's going to kill you. If you tamper with electrical equipment, it's going to kill you. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a solar farm or it doesn't matter if it's already in the road. You don't tamper with electrical equipment. That's pretty simple. I'm done defending myself as an engineer. If anyone else wants to talk about that, they can take it up with the Massachusetts Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. I'm a certified, I have a stamp in Massachusetts. I'm a professional engineer. I took a test. 20% of engineers that graduate with an engineering degree get their license. So if there are any more questions about my engineering acumen, they can take it up with the board. I'm done answering questions about that. And more than anyone else in this room, I am an expert on wave theory because I did take classes in it. I want to talk about why I didn't bring up the 50 kilowatt proposal in the meeting. And honestly, it's because there was never going to be an agreement at the meeting. No one here is stupid. Everybody understands leverage. When we left this last meeting on October 27th, the opponents of the project left knowing that they needed a supermajority, they needed a unanimous vote from all four of you, and that the vote, as it stood when they left, was split. There was no reason for them to come to a compromise. There was never going to be an agreement. Still, I made the concessions that I made in this middle ground proposal because I thought that was something that the board could take and run with. Because, you know, I don't think, I've been called disingenuous like 3 or 4 times, it's getting a little old. I don't think I was being disingenuous in saying that we had a constructive meeting and that we took steps in the right direction. And Did they give me an inch and I took a mile? I don't know. That's for you to describe. But we talked about things like the location, and we were never going to come to an agreement. So what I'm asking is for the board to understand where those discussions were going, understand the soft spots of those discussions, keeping in mind that there wasn't going to be an agreement, and take the baton and run with it. I think, because the alternative, right? On the other hand, a non-approval decision doesn't work out for anybody. For the board to punt on this, right, is to give this thing back to the 10 kilowatt bylaw, because that wasn't a bluff. I brought a couple things tonight to help demonstrate that. The sign is beautiful. My fiance made that for me, and I love it. I brought the agreement with the electric company that says you're good to go, green light. I brought an LOI for a local plastics factory that's going to buy the power. It's a done deal. You guys came to the site, no question. You saw the stuff laying in the backyard. I bought it. It's on. The 10 kilowatt thing was not a bluff. If this goes down today, tomorrow we're building 10 kilowatts. The building permit's sitting in the office in the Ritter building. The problem with that is that that's not the best solution for anybody, right? That doesn't even work for the RAM stacks. I can't pay for $10,000 worth of trees on a 10 kW system. It doesn't work at all. The way I worded it in this letter is, I think, the way I want to articulate it, so I think I'm going to read from it for fear of being inarticulate. A decision of non-approval pushes us all back to the 10 kW small ground mount process, and it strips the board of their ability to serve the abutters by requiring additional screening, by relocating the racks, and ordering an agreement that I'm not going to expand it in the future. A decision of non-approval works against the best interests of all parties involved. It does not serve the abutters, as 2 racks totaling 10 kW will still be installed without screening. They will not be able to provide input on where on the property it's going to be installed, nor a guarantee that the system won't be expanded in the future. I might come back and apply again. I know that it's the board's responsibility to protect the abutters, and I also think that it's the board's responsibility to protect me. Because, like I said, I'm not from out of town. I'm not a land baron I live in that land. I live in that house. I'm not ashamed to look at solar every day. I'm proud of it. When people said, "Oh, he works at Borrego Solar. He works at that big solar company," like I was Goliath and I was supposed to be ashamed of that. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what I do every single day. And I don't roll my eyes about things like global climate change and get cynical about it. I don't. I care, and I think I can make a difference. I know I can. The other edge of this sword is that the non-approval carries the potential of driving a wedge further between what's already going on here. And I have tried my hardest to take the high road at every turn, twist and turn that this thing has taken, even though it's been difficult to hear from my neighbors when you say, well, why are they so mad? Are they going to see it? Well, no, I'm installing $15,000 worth of trees. Well, are they going to hear it? No, I guarantee they're not going to hear it. I'll install more trees if they show up a year down the road and they say they can hear it. I'll install more trees then. It's difficult for me, someone who's opened my doors to my neighbors, who keeps those trails in the back open for everybody, to hear what you've worked so hard on, worked your butt off all summer putting together agreements while I'm at grad school at night and I work full time. They're going to take that, they're going to try to take that away from you because they don't like it. Not because it affects their lives, their livability, just because they don't like it. And I have a huge problem with that, and I've swallowed it because I feel it's in my best interest to sort of be calm up here and not say things like this is ridiculous that we're even here. But if we keep going down this path and we go towards non-approval, I don't know that this is something I'm going to be able to let go. What if I want to put up no trespassing signs everywhere? I'm sure all these people enjoy the land. I enjoy that they enjoy it right now. But it's not very confidence-inspiring from my neighbors that when I'm trying to do something good with my property, for my life, for my family, that they're passionately objective against it just because they don't like it. In the words of someone at the last meeting, it was phrased as, we don't want to create a Führer in another neighborhood. And I don't know that we're all in a position to be able to circumvent that. So, I mean, as Mr. Lockwood's articulated in his closing statements last meeting, the state of Massachusetts has adopted some policies that treat solar very similar to agriculture. It's no coincidence that they call them solar farms, right? They're a form of farming. They harvest a natural, replenishable resource for the benefit of the immediate community without the creation of any harmful byproducts. And in a neighborhood that's being termed a farming neighborhood, a horse neighborhood, an agricultural neighborhood, we're now talking about denying a project that the state uses the same language in Chapter 40A. I included this in the attachments today. Section 3, subjects which zoning may not regulate. They use the same language a couple paragraphs apart when they talk about agriculture, and then they use the same language when they talk about solar. And I know we have a bylaw, and that answers that question. But what I'm asking is that the board deliver a decision that's consistent with the spirit of this, which is that we shouldn't be trying to wring our hands around the neck of solar. It should be something that is promoted. I mean, I want, when we're past this and we're a couple years down the road, I think people are going to be proud to live next to it. I would be. Thanks.
I think that's all. Yep.
Hello. Jim Targo, 35 Cortlandt Circle. First, I wanted to follow up with a question I asked last week, where it appeared that this plan differed from the one before the ZBA, which I believe would make it inconsistent with the dimensional variation. Could I ask you whether you've checked that, Mr. Burney?
The plans that were submitted to the planning board are a different set of plans than were submitted to the zoning board. The status of that with the dimensional variation would be up to the interpretation of the building inspector, because he's the zoning enforcement officer, so he would have to make the determination that they do or don't conform. The plans that were submitted to the zoning board appear to be a more rudimentary set of plans that show a general layout. The plans that were submitted to the planning board are more hashed out and engineered, and they show a greater deal of specificity. So they can, it's an interpretation thing. Where is it in the same spirit? Is it a general iteration of taking a concept and fleshing it out to final engineering, or is it considered a separate set of plans? I'd have to get a written determination from the building inspector.
Okay, so this board has no opinion on whether what's before you is consistent with the ZBA ruling. The building inspector would need to rule on that first.
Well, the board can certainly have an opinion.
Okay.
They are five
I apologize for
individuals, and it is a subjective permit, so
Yes, okay.
they are able to make their own determination. I'm not going to say it's not, that it voids the zoning opinion.
May I ask, is it an identical footprint?
It's very hard to tell based on the level of detail in the plan submitted to the zoning board. They're not at the same scale. One uses an aerial photograph. The one submitted to the planning board shows a surveyed plan and has, again, more specificity and removes the aerial photograph. So comparing like to like, it's not, you can't lay a transfer over and trace based on the fact that they're separate scales.
Okay. So I guess I'm a little confused by that then. So is it in my court to talk to the building inspector and
No,
ask
he
whether...
had a meeting this afternoon and I was unable to get to him before the end of the day.
Okay. So he is examining that?
Yes. He and I are going to have a conversation about it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I would just address, so I will address sound. So I'm not an acoustic engineer, but I am an optical engineer. And I'm a practicing engineer with 4 degrees, and I've taken wave theory classes. So I apologize that I didn't take a better look at this material since we didn't see it till today. And at work, I took a quick look. There is a short equation this long that was used for the calculation. And that's what I was taught in engineering school, is a back-the-envelope calculation, as was Mr. Conway. And that's what you do when you start out. It's not what you do when you finish. Engineering is not what you would accept from your consulting engineers. It assumes a good case. We all know sound is directional, which that equation doesn't include. You've all heard people across fields. That equation says you didn't do that. We're going to put inverters with boxes in the field. Those are going to reflect noise. Those are not included in the calculation. So I appreciate the start. I appreciate the fact that Mr. Conway has provided you with numbers, but I would suggest those are not conservative numbers and do not include the actual situation. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Yes, Tom. And while he's walking up here, I just want to say, because everybody's saying, we received this today as well, and your meeting was Thursday, and this was sent on Friday. Well, the planning office is closed on Friday, so nobody got this till today. So I don't want anybody to think that people had it before other people. We all got it today. So I just wanted to clarify that. Hi, Tom.
Thank you. Tom Alonso, 284 Lancaster Avenue. First, I want to say that I'm a proud owner of a solar project myself on my roof, and I'm certainly for solar energy and all of the green energy that it provides. I'm also certainly for the ability of towns to regulate solar energy as well, as the state allows. So while there's a certain intent for what they say on one hand, they certainly entertain and have openly agreed that there are regulations that towns can provide in where these projects can go, the size they can go, and they've given towns latitude that we have afforded ourselves in the new, or the latest bylaw. The first one, we didn't take advantage of some of them, and again, with an 18-month process, certainly came across solar overlay districts where we identify where we would consider large solar projects. We've also defined for ourselves, in light of no state definition, and the fact that the state affords us the ability to define what a large commercial project is, we did that. We dictated buffers, and all of these were a process of lots of meetings, lots of public hearings. And I would like to say that they weren't the final result did not come about lightly. And again, the sitting members of the board who were there during that process know they weren't coming about lightly, and those who were new on the board, if they followed it, probably understand that as well. So there are a few problems that I see. I'll just mention some that other people have mentioned. I think the lack of documentation along the way has been problematic. I don't know that it still meets some of the special permitting bylaws. The fact that the project's changing from what it was in the ZBA, the previous speaker just spoke about that, that is problematic. Some of them are procedural. I think that, and again, with all due respect, I think when a deciding member of this board who will be voting on this publishes a letter outside of a meeting, that opens some really questions about open meeting law and things like that, about telegraphing to everybody how you might vote outside of a meeting. That's problematic. But the largest thing I think that's most important, and we talked about intent. I think the applicant talked about intent. Other people talked about the intent. I think Mr. Burney talked about the intent of the zoning, the plan in front of the zoning board, and we should evaluate the project before us with that. I think the real intent is, what did the people of Lunenburg expect when the current solar bylaw was passed? I think that issuing a special permit power offers a lot of authority to a board, whether it's this board or the ZBA, in this case, obviously this board. And I think that is definitely constrained by the fact of what is the goodwill intent that the special permitting process provides, and how is that viewed by the people at town meeting who passed it and all the people who were involved in the public hearing and got it forward. And it is that I think that this project really, and this whole process needs to be very carefully decided. Because when people saw in the bylaw it needed to be 20 acres, when people saw in the bylaw you needed to have 200-foot buffer, when it had to have 50-foot setbacks, when it shows that it only could be 10 kilowatts, and that's what defined it before needing a special permit, people in the town knew that there could possibly be waivers in that, but not to the degree that we're talking about now. If somebody came and they said, I have 19.7 acres, or I'm proposing a 13 kilowatt project, or I have a 190-foot buffer zone, I think those are the kind of waivers that people have in their mind, and every one of them that I just mentioned are completely, I'll use the word obliterated. They're completely obliterated to the point where the expectations of the people, and I would consider myself one of those people who voted for the solar bylaw, given that that's what I thought the protection was, that is completely being obliterated to the point where it feels like there is effectively no solar bylaw if this passes. I think the people in that residence had every intent to understand that this kind of project would be prevented specifically by this bylaw. And I think that's what their expectation was, and that was a large intent. I don't know how anybody voted in town meeting, but I'm sure the people who voted there thought the same thing. So I think it really does set a bad precedent, and if we're talking about intent at the state level or at the ZBA level, I think the intent of the bylaw itself really needs to be addressed, because without a denial, which I would recommend to the board, as I did last time when you had the public hearing, without that, to me, you've completely undermined the bylaw itself and everybody's intent and everybody's expectation of what they thought it represented. Thank you.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to address him?
No, you can address the board.
Okay. Do you know if he's been to the site?
I don't know if he's been to the site.
I think it's important.
No, I...
Because the bylaw is a piece of paper that I understand it. It was the subject of a lot of, people, sweat over that. But the site tells the tale. And this is a good site. And it's a small system. So that's...
Any other? Yep.
I'll be brief. Greg Kelly, 45 Cortlandt Circle. Couple quick points. Number one, I failed to mention before, because I was obviously disappointed with the way that my words during our meeting were characterized. I jumped over some different things, but one I did want to point out to you too is that he had indicated two of our trustees from our association were there. That was not accurate. One of our trustees was there, Lou. The other individual who he's referring to, Ms. Nolan, is not a trustee. So again, it was incorrect information. I just want to correct for the record. In terms of the piece of paper comment from a moment ago, obviously I'm not an attorney. I'm sure that others could speak of this much more eloquently than I, but paper or not, the law is the law, and we're obviously just asking that that the law be adhered to by our neighbor. And then lastly, I just want to point out one thing, and I meant to say this before. Mr. Conway obviously just said it verbally to you a few moments ago with, I think, some words that he said after he spoke to you. But both in his letter and also in his comments to you, he talked about basically how, in his opinion, it's not beneficial, and I'm characterizing or summarizing in the interest of time here. Basically, he was talking about how it's not in anyone's best interest if you deny it and then he just goes and puts in the 10 kilowatt system. I have to say that for me, it's offensive, and I think it's disrespectful to the board. Basically, that's, I think, very telling about the type of person that we're dealing with in our neighborhood. And again, frankly, I think I try and give people the benefit of the doubt. That's why I spoke with him at our house, and we had this meeting. But, in essence, what he is doing to both us and, frankly, also to you is he's saying, look, if you do not grant me my application, if you do not give me what I'm telling you I want, then I'm going to go ahead and do this. And I'm going to put in a 10 kilowatt system, and I'm going to put it where I want on my property, and I'm not going to put it by my house, I'm going to put it by yours, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, that may or may not be true. But in any event, I guess the point is for me to expect us to be reasonable and to come to some sort of an agreement about what we would allow in our neighborhood that is contrary to law, it just isn't. I'm looking at the spirit with which he's saying this. He's basically giving us an ultimatum. And he's saying, look, do this or this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to put it there and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, your actions are pretty telling. And, you know, for us, we're good neighbors. We're willing to hear you out. We're willing to be reasonable. We're willing to talk with you, have open dialogue. But, you know, for you to then not only say that in your letter, but also to say it to the board, that says something about who you are and what kind of a neighbor you are. And, you know, I would encourage you to do a little bit of soul searching relative to that. I'm sorry, my apologies. I would encourage the applicant to reconsider his motivations, and he'll do what he's going to do. But for me, it doesn't change anything in my mind. I would not ask you to grant his application because of the ultimatum he's giving you and us. The law is the law. It sets a precedent. And if we end up with a 10 kilowatt system close to, you know, in our neighborhood, well, that's unfortunate. But that's no reason to circumvent the bylaw. So thank you again for your time, for the opportunity to speak with you twice tonight. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike Mackin, 26 Cortlandt Circle. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Time is late, so I'll keep it short. One of the things that Mr. Alonso alluded to earlier is something I think is very important for the board to keep in mind, which is that whether or not this project is granted a special permit, that is what will be. But what is important to me is what precedent that sets for the future of this particular bylaw, because it basically eviscerates the idea of a small project. There will be no more small projects, so that anybody with, you know, a certain acreage will be able to do it. I have no ill will towards the applicant. I have no ill will towards, you know, his application. I do believe that it is up to the board to use its authority to ensure that the bylaw is properly enforced. Now, of course, the board does have discretion, as all boards do, in granting certain special permits. But we hope to have special permits that meet the spirit of the law. In fact, it's interesting for me when I was reading pieces of the bylaw that when it talked about special permitting, yes, of course, it did, you know, mention things like historical significant and scenic vistas and natural rural character, so on and so forth. But what it then goes down to is it says in 14.152 that the planning board may impose any conditions deemed necessary to achieve the purpose of this bylaw, such as, but not limited to, the following: greater than minimum setback requirements, limitation of size and extent of facilities. There seemed to be written into the spirit here the idea that the law was to be a protective law, a law that would ensure that small projects remain small projects. I think that if we granted special permit in this case, we would in effect eviscerate this piece of the bylaw. It would no longer have any force of effect. I hope that you do disallow this special permit.
Okay. Any other public comment? I think we're ready to shut off public comment. And
So just before we do that, we have
Sure.
the peer review engineer is here. We can continue to speak with him outside of public comment period.
yes,
Only for clarification. I mean, if you want testimony from him, you should do it prior to closing the hearing. You can shut off public comment in that it seems that everybody's had their say, but I would not close the hearing.
Got it.
Come on up, Wes. Now, I don't know, Wes, well, you can introduce yourself.
Wesley Fliss, Whitman and Bingham Associates. We'd received the plans the night or the day of the last hearing that you guys had on this, and so we just went through the additional information that the applicant had submitted to us at that time in reference to the review letter that we had submitted to the board back at the end of September. And we just prepared our letter with the additional information, going over the items that were addressed by the additional information submitted by the applicant, and also just stating also the information or the questions that we had that were outstanding. If you want, I can go through those items real quick with you, or if you want me to.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the first item, and I think Adam had touched on it real quick, we brought up the comment about the special permit for dimensional variation. I know, I think we were all under the same impression that it had to be taken up with the building inspector. So until the building inspector makes a reference regard to that, I don't think that anybody needs to talk about that anymore. Item number 2 had to do with information with regards to the executed interconnection service agreement between the applicant and Unitil. That was provided by the applicant. Number 3 had to do with the decommissioning cost and also the surety. And the decommissioning costs were submitted by the applicant at the last meeting. I know, say a favorable decision was granted by the board, I think that can be conditioned that the surety can be in place prior to the building permit being issued. And so I think that's something that can be conditioned if that were to come around to that point of the project. 4 had to do with the dimensional offset to the property. And I know if the plan does change, obviously this might change also, but we just asked for that dimensional dimension to be shown on the plan that shows it to be in 30 feet from the property. So that there's something basically that you have in your file that you can say, yep, you showed it at 30 feet from the property line. It's right here, it's labeled. And if he doesn't build it that way, at least you have something to hold him by. Number 5, there was no further comment. Number 6 had to do with the signage, and we just asked for the signage to be shown actually on the site plan, just so you guys know where the signage is going to be. He states that it's going to be put where the meter is, right at the road. And I know it should be, just so, like I said, a lot of times contractors and inspectors don't ever look at the decisions. They just look at the set of plans. And so it's a lot easier to have everything on the set of plan. So we just asked for that to be shown on the plan also. Number 7 had to do with photographs that were required as part of the submittal process. Those photographs were submitted. On our letter, we do have points 8, 9, and 10 had to do with the stormwater. And I know 8 and 9 actually were suggestions to the board that if a favorable decision was made, that these were basically made as conditions of approval, just to make sure that what's under the panels and what's out there that was being proposed underneath the panels is what's actually built. Because we've, like I said, seen in other projects where somebody will say that they're going to leave the grass under the panels, and later on they'll end up being stone or something like that, because it's a lot easier to maintain under panels. On a project of this size, it shouldn't be an issue with maintenance of grass under the panels. Number 11, and the next couple of issues actually came up during the tech review meeting back in September. Number 11 had to do with the construction entrance being shown on the plans, and I know Jack Rodequins, the Public Works Director, just wanted to make sure that construction entrance was revised and what's actually shown on the plan. He had some specific comments on that, and so I know the applicant knows about it. He was at that meeting. And so if there are final plans that are done as part of a favorable decision, that just needs to be updated to make sure that Jack's comments are taken care of. I don't think there are anything major with regards to the construction entrance. It's just the way that Jack likes to see the construction entrance done, and it's different than what was shown on the plan. Number 12 actually is in conjunction with a comment that one of the abutters made this evening. The fire department did have a comment at the tech review meeting with regards to access out there, and they just wanted to make sure that there is access out to the panels if the development were to go through, to make sure that there is a plowed access out there during the winter months. And I know the applicant stated that they would go ahead and make sure that that's done, and that's something that I don't know if that's maybe one of those things that it might be able to be conditioned by the board on a favorable decision if that were to come to that point of. Number 13 just has to be taken care of. Like I said, if there are final design plans that are submitted, just to make sure that the erosion control is shown properly on the plan. And like I said, if the array is going to change location or size, whatever like that, some of these things can kind of be taken care of on that final plan. So it's pretty simple. And then 14, the last comment that we had with regards to them filing with the Conservation Commission, and I believe they did file RDA with the Conservation Commission, is that correct? And they got a negative determination from the Conservation Commission at the time for the proposal that's in front of you this evening, which is pretty consistent with how the Conservation Commission deals with that stuff. So we're basically, at this point, done with the major issues. Like I said, the other minor things can either be conditioned by the board or being taken care of in a final set of plans that would be issued by the applicant if the project were to move forward. So from an engineering standpoint, we had no other issues with the project.
Okay. And if he moves zone to zone 2, did
Yep.
you see zone 3, 2, and 1?
I did, yes, I did see the documents that were submitted to the board today with regards to the meeting that took place. From a standpoint of drainage, it really doesn't change the drainage part of it because you're still looking at the same square footage of an array, and as long as they still keep the same existing growth that's there now underneath the panels, the drainage wouldn't change from that standpoint. And it still kind of goes along with my comment before is, as long as you were to kind of protect yourself, that you conditioned a favorable decision saying that they always had to have grass under the panels, that drainage part of the calculation shouldn't change from our standpoint.
And do you know if that now would be an issue with wetlands if it's moved up to zone 2?
If it's zone 2, it would probably have to be moved to more toward the south. I'm trying to,
I would probably go back to the Conservation Commission.
Right, but
Correct.
this is all going to...
no, from
it'll
a
go-
site standpoint, they do have a little bit of room there. It would probably be moved a little more to the south than it currently is. I'm just trying to take memory off of looking at the plans. I don't have it in front of me. Probably have to be moved to the south a little bit also when they move east. Is that correct? East is towards your house? Yeah, so it'd have to be moved to the southeast a little bit, but there's some room on their property to do that.
All right. That was just because that was brought up this evening.
Yeah, and that's, yeah, I mean, there is enough room there to, within that zone 2, I think that they can maneuver that stuff around in zone 2, so.
No questions?
I have a question. Wes, if we were looking to address potential noise issues as part of our conditions, would your firm be in a position to evaluate noise impact?
Typically, we wouldn't. And typically, what happens on solar projects, and we've been involved with a number of them from both sides of the table, is when the project is built, you have an independent reviewer go out there and do the noise study along the perimeter of the property of the applicant. And they have their own sound monitoring devices to go out there and tell you what the sound is. And so what you'd do is you'd go out today with those devices and say, okay, what's the standing noise today at his property boundary? And obviously it would be under the applicant's responsibility to pay for that independent reviewer to do this. But they would go out there today, say, right along his boundary to the north that the biggest issue is, and say, what's the noise there now? And then when the development's built, to go out there later and say, okay, what's the sound there now? Obviously, if there's a large increase that's not acceptable, then obviously something would have to be done on his property to buffer that noise. Be it a fence or more tree growth or so forth, where a lot of times when we've seen it, the board kind of has that, it's a very open condition, I guess, from the board standpoint, that you have to be satisfied with the noise study that's done post-construction.
All right, so, because we could put that as a directive.
Correct.
That he has to have that done.
Correct.
But so there are possibilities to decipher that noise.
Correct. And there's, like I said, there are a number of municipalities actually local to here that actually have that right into their bylaw, a little more specific within their bylaw. So we can give that to you and kind of give you some direction to how you'd want to approach that. But we have had some experience with that where, like I said, it's something that you can do it as a directive, yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we would, because he's saying there's no noise. So we want to make sure at the end, there is no noise, and if there is, then we're going to have to fix that.
Correct. You have a mechanism to correct. Yes,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
So that would be a directive.
Yeah.
No, thanks. That's, yeah, actually, I got one more. So you may have mentioned this. So around safety, I unfortunately don't have solar bylaw in front of me. I forgot my other folder when I came today. Been looking for it a good part of the meeting. What's in our bylaw now? It's pretty vague around.
It is vague, and I know even on there we made a question about, is there going to be fencing? Because a lot of the larger developments you see fencing. If you talk to any of the solar developers, they do it more to protect themselves from people stealing their equipment from the developments, because there's so much of a upfront cost. I mean, you're talking millions and millions of dollars on that large, like the Chase Road solar development. So they put the fence up there. They're not there monitoring it, so they'll put the fence up to kind of secure their own development. Here, obviously, the applicant lives there, so there's no as big of concern about theft, and that's where we see a lot of the solar developers in this state. They put it up there for just for theft reason, to kind of keep their site safe, because they're not always there.
And part of the no fencing here was that we didn't, for the wildlife.
Correct.
Because I drive by every day. That's the way I go to work.
Yep.
In 3 days, because now I stare at your house every day. I'm not a stalker, I just stare at your house every day. And there's deer in your backyard every morning. There's 4 or 5 deer. And so I now drive saying, like, how's that going to impact these 4 deer that are in your yard every morning eating breakfast? Because it's beautiful to see the 4 deer, and I'm afraid the
Right.
fence would.
No, and we come up with the same issue. Like I said, sitting on the other side of the table, we have the same, we get asked all the time, you know, what can you do about fencing if we're going to put up a fence around a larger development?
Right.
And so we have seen where the fence has been lifted like a foot off the ground. We at least get the smaller animals that have access through your development, but you will kind of, you know, preclude the deer from running through that small area. But like I say, let's say, you know, the applicant stated in his letter, and we're under the same impression that there's no state law that requires them to fence these developments, and so there's nothing that you could say they have to fence it. Like I said, a majority of these developers, they just put it up there for safety reasons, for their own piece, own property value. So,
Thank you.
all set?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have any questions? I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so I think I'm ready to close the public hearing, and then we can, as a board, do our talking and voting and next steps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I'd make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
This one's supposed to do it. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for participating, and I want to thank, because you did not have to have a meeting with the neighbors, and you did not have to have a meeting with the applicant, and I thank you both for doing that, for taking the time out of your busy schedules and doing that, and trying to come to some type of consensus. I appreciate that from both the applicant and the residents. Thank you very much. So with that, what are our next steps now? We kind of have to...
You have to decide if someone is going to make a motion, and then you can discuss your motion and vote.
Oh.
At what point before a vote or before a motion do I ask for a straw poll in the event that I want to do that?
You
Is
would
there a
have
point of
done.
no return?
Yeah, we're kind of at it.
I'd like to request that.
That's up to the board if they're willing to do that.
What is he? I didn't hear what he was
He's-
requesting.
Are we, he wants a straw poll, but are we prepared to make a real vote now? Was it, is
Yeah,
there
I
a
think
reason?
we're about to make a real vote. I think the straw poll might detract from our ability to, like, deliberate.
But I want to
prior-
deliberate right now. I don't know that I'm ready to vote. I want to hear your thoughts, opinions, before I say
before
I'm
we
ready to
put
vote.
anything out there, yeah.
Yeah.
I understand the,
Understood, yeah.
I'm not ready to vote right now. I want to hear your guys' thoughts.
well, I
and-
mean, we're going to vote tonight, I'm assuming, right? Or we're gonna.
I don't know.
Okay, well, I'd make a motion that, well, how does this work here, Adam? Do we have to have a motion
If
before we
you-
discuss
Yeah,
it?
if you make the motion, it would be positive or negative,
Okay.
and then someone would second it and for discussion, and you would have your discussion and deliberation at that point.
Okay, so,
You can amend it, right?
yeah.
You
we
can always amend a motion, correct.
Thank you.
Generally, also, when you make the motion, you would attach any potential conditions.
All of them with the motion?
Correct.
Right.
For our
That's
findings
why
and
I was
directives?
talking about
Correct.
amendment,
Okay,
because it'll be
Oh, we've never
conditions.
done that.
so,
Well, the motion, you're voting on the motion, so if you're conditioning the approval, that should be included within the motion, because that's what you're voting on.
can we
Well,
discuss
then we
the
have to have a lot of
conditions?
discussion then, because if it all go to vote for this, there would be, at least 2 pages of directives. So to have all those right now in a motion, I wouldn't have them.
We're probably going to have to discuss. So I guess I would make a motion that, with conditions to be discussed by the board, motion to approve with conditions that we'll discuss.
And then you'll amend your motion.
Yeah.
That's fine.
So I make a motion to approve the project with significant conditions to be discussed and determined now by the board.
Second.
Okay, discussion. We'll start with Ken and just go down.
All right, discussions. So, yeah, I would like to see the conditions put forth. One, the sound thing, I think that you've committed to have no sound. I think that's going to be challenging to do. But if you can set the what are they called? Not converters. What are the inverters? If you can position the inverters in a position on the property that the sound is not disruptive, I think that would address the only even really far outfield concern of public health. If you could argue that the noise of 8 PCs, which I would argue is probably quieter than a single pool filter, and we don't seem to have a problem with the neighbors' pool filters, but I would think that if we put that in place, then that would address the public health concern. I'd also like to make sure that we have a condition that that he addresses all the items that the engineering review has brought up, and that we also get building inspector approval of the revised plans in accordance. And I'm not going to propose any location changes, but somebody else is welcome to do that. And I also am not going to propose any kilowatt changes, but somebody else is welcome to do that as well. Those are my inputs.
Can you just clarify your building inspector condition that you'd like to see?
So there seems to be a concern that what the building inspector approved for us to vote on for special permit is not necessarily what's in front of us to vote on for a special permit.
Okay, so you're more looking for a letter of clarification that there's continuity between the zoning board and the planning decision?
In my opinion, it's one and the same. In my opinion, the plan is further revised, and the building inspector would approve the revised plan because they approved the less detailed plan, but I can't assert what the building inspector would say.
Well, and I would add on to that, because if we go to Zone 2, because I would definitely be Zone 2 versus Zone 1, and if we go to Zone 2, does that have to go back to the ZBA, because the ZBA approved Zone 1?
Yeah, and it would have to go to the Board of Health, I'm sorry, not the Board of Health, the
Conservation.
Conservation Commission, so that would add another qualifier if we choose to move it to Zone 2.
And my recommendation
But given
would
that
be-
we don't have neighborhood recommendation or neighborhood agreement of any zone, Zone 1 or Zone 2, and they seem to be okay from the public speaking here that he put a 10 kilowatt unit in Zone 1. So at this point, I wouldn't recommend actually moving the zone either.
And the reason for my question, and what I'll advise the board, is not to condition your approval on any other individual or board's approval. That is it's not a defensible position. So if the board chooses to vote in the affirmative and chooses to attach conditions, saying that it's approved conditional upon conservation's approval, that's a non-starter. So it would be that he would need to abide all other boards and commissions' approvals.
Sure.
As opposed to, it's not approved unless this person approves it, so.
Sure, all I'm saying is
Yeah,
that.
and you just want
My
clarification.
qualifications say that, as I understand it, what he has proposed has already been approved by.
So you want clarification from the building inspector as opposed to approval?
I just want to make sure that we're not approving a special permit that we actually aren't authorized to approve because there was a paperwork issue with the ZBA.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No, that was it, thank you.
All right. For me, I don't see the project having a significant safety issue, because I work with solar panels. I understand it's going to meet these standards. I don't see a safety issue. I really have a hard time believing that the noise is going to be an issue. And the statement was made that it's a commercial use in a residential area. I have nothing against a resident trying to make money on their property. Small business and home businesses makes for a vibrant and strong community and a vibrant and strong country. And I firmly believe in that. But within that, we have these bylaws as to what people will feel comfortable with as far as a commercial entity in their neighborhood, and that's 200 feet. And for the applicant to demonstrate to me that it's less than 200 feet is satisfactory, then I would have to get the feeling that his neighbor also thinks that 200 feet is satisfactory. So on that note, I can't support the project.
Okay.
Okay, so, I guess, just to kind of explain where I'm coming from, Damon and Ken have done a good job of explaining kind of their perspectives on it. A lot has been talked about our bylaw, and, I was part of the group that made the bylaw. The special permit process is part of the bylaw, and we knew that when we made the bylaw that we were going to need that special permit process, because anything greater than 10 kilowatts, calling that the same as what the state calls large project, which is I think 300 kilowatts or megawatts, sorry.
250.
250 megawatts.
Kilowatts.
There's a big gap there, and we were aware that we would have, until we got a bylaw that had clearer by right provisions for that range of medium scope, for lack of a better word, that, some could argue at the lower end, still small scope, that we were going to need to judiciously exercise the special permit process to provide, fair siting of such projects. That was just the way it was. So we have very clear by right provisions for really big and really small, and but I think to apply those either for the really big or the really small, literally, to the stuff in between, it's not a literal process. It's really about achieving the intent. I think, if you visit the site, is maybe most of the board or all the board has, and if you visit the other large solar sites, which are like a megawatt over on Pleasant Street, and I think larger over on West Townsend, the scale is not really, you can compare it, but they're quite different. The issues we were facing when constructing a bylaw for very large solar, and where we were mandating a large buffer zone, we were dealing with situations where, because of the size of the project, even with the best intents of buffering, it would always be impossible to complete, as the neighbors in the project can attest, to completely mitigate the visual impact. And so we put in we did the best that we could to balance the need to be able to develop solar in town and still not infringe on the quality of life, minimize the infringement on quality of life for those abutting. But as you again, and we were painfully aware of this when we made the bylaw, what made sense as regulation for a truly large installation some of the principles are valuable. The exact measurements don't directly apply. So what we do need to do with a special permit is, in my interpretation, having been a participant in the process, based on what I understand about our town's goals, the state law, is you want a special permit process where you have reasonably objective criteria, even if they're not quantified as clearly as something in by right, and then you want to evaluate proposals against those criteria. So as Ken mentioned, our criteria around this are, public health. In the bylaw, we talk about impacts on sight lines and character and that type of thing. And, having tried to do is objective an analysis of if not the exact proposed project, the proposed project with the willingness to modify the project. As far as I can judge, this project appears to be able to be implementable in a way that meets the criteria of the special permit process. So, I think it's important, on the one hand, people talked about what residents expect out of the special permit process and when they approve the bylaw. It's easy, as an elected official to just, whenever people are uncomfortable with something, just, go with what you hear. But I think we have an obligation because to the town of Lunenburg to properly adjudicate the special permit process. And, because, right now it's someone, in a butter, it may be your neighbor wants to do solar next to you. At some point, it could be you want to do something in your yard, which the town has a special permit there for, so under the right conditions, you can do it. And you kind of want to know that the conditions that were governing the special permit were what was evaluated, not necessarily the loudness of the voices or the number of voices. Now, that said, I can totally understand where the abutters are coming from. I think with any project, and especially with something like energy, there's a fear of the unknown. I mean, and that's I can completely relate to that. But I think, when it comes down to it, I have to look at this. I think the most, in terms of fairness to the town, what town should expect from a special permit and what's, most legally supportable in adjudicating a special permit. I would say, I think there's some conditions we can apply here, but I think we rule in favor. As far as conditions I would apply, I think, I would like to see it move to zone 2. I'd like to have the requirement that the screening plan along the lines of what the applicant has in some of his supplementary materials indicated he's willing to put there, get that into the conditions. I think having some provision around the sound, as we've discussed, is going to be important. I think maybe bringing that out to the closer to the shade line and increasing the offset might be something that might be something we could consider. I'd be curious what the rest of the board thinks on that. Just got to look at my notes here. Sorry.
Take your time.
I can, if we want to go on to you, I can come back on the conditions. But that's in general. I mean, as far as the fencing condition, we've received a lot of, from our peer review engineer, from the applicant, that this isn't a safety hazard. We require, I think that we probably have I don't know if it's a state law or a local law requiring fencing around swimming pools. So, I would be okay.
Building code.
It's building code.
Yes. Around pools, yes, it is.
I can certainly understand, having that might be something we want to do until we have something more formal in place. And we've been requiring it on the large projects as a condition. I wouldn't be adverse to requiring it on the project. But yeah, I'd say let's go on to Joanna and I can continue to review my notes.
Okay. For me, I first want to, again, make sure I understand, because it's been talked about a lot, is that the ZBA approved lot size and setbacks.
Correct.
They did not at all talk of the scale, or the wattage, kilowatts, whatever you want to call it, that they actually, because I'm looking at.
I think that there was a discussion where the applicant put a number on the original application and the zoning board attached their own statement that the size was irrelevant because it was larger than 10.
Right, they just.
That's the way that it reads upon the letters on the paper.
Is that they agreed it was over 10,
Correct. That's the way that it appears.
that they didn't set a number.
And again, that's something that I think goes back to what Ken was saying about the clarification from the building inspector about continuity.
And just a thought on that, yeah, I think if we do approve another condition, we should probably, just so everyone kind of has an idea around expectations, we should probably lock in a footprint and,
Well, that's-
and lock in
A number.
a number.
Right.
Just.
That's
and then
all part of
in
it.
that, when I say lock in, I mean, to change the footprint or change the number would require a new special permit or, you know, unless the town bylaw changed or something like that.
Right. Because that's, I just keep looking back at it all, and the ZBA approved the setback, so the 30 feet versus the 200, and the lot size, the 20 acres to the 13. So that's what they approved, and then they said that the development plan review process, which is sized over 10K. So whatever that is over 10K, you've got to go and set that. So we would have, I would have a specific number of what that's going to be, and if they want to change that, they would have to come back on that special permit. I would need answers if we go to Zone 2. Does that have to go back to the ZBA, or no, because it's still on the 13 acres and they already approved a 30-foot? And I don't know now if we're moving that into the south, as Wes said, does that give that more setback, a higher setback? Because we're moving it more into his property versus the neighbor's property. So I don't know if that would have to go back to ZBA. The inverts, I'm on the same with the inverts, move them as far away to the other side as possible. Conservation, I want to make sure that Zone 2 wetlands is okay. The fire truck, I agree, needs to get in there if need be, and sound at the expense of the applicant. I would want a sound done before I could vote on this. These are all things I would need to know before I can even vote
Well,
on the decision.
You say the sound done by the applicant, you're talking about the study that Wes was talking about?
Yes.
Well, there's no way to do that before. It would be a condition of,
That, right, the sound would be.
a condition.
Yes.
yeah, it would be a
The
condition.
sound would be a condition.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, because we have to do it now, but I want the applicant to say, know that he's gotta.
Oh,
pay for
sure,
that.
yeah, and that would be part of the condition.
Yes. So those are just right now, in this 10-minute that I'm sitting here. I'm sure more will as we go.
I'm sorry, Joanne, what did you just say? I didn't catch
That's
that.
what I'm thinking of right now. That's what's in my head right now.
Okay.
And I know it's a 2/3 vote.
No,
It's-
it's
unanimous.
all four members.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Now it's all four, right? Because we don't have a fifth person.
Correct, it's a supermajority.
Right. So
Of the
now all
five.
four of us have, it can't be
That
a
is
3 to
correct.
1, it
No,
can't
it
be
cannot.
2, where Matthew has reclused himself, all four of us have to be yea or nay.
Correct.
It's not 2/3 of the four.
That's correct.
I just wanted to make that clear to everybody.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing too, just a comment to the board. Massachusetts Chapter 40A, Section 3, says that we have the right to reasonably regulate these things, but not prohibit them, which means that we can come up with reasonable conditions, but in my opinion, a no vote would indicate that we were prohibiting it. And so I'd like to hear what the other members of the board, how they interpret that.
Well, we're not, can you sit back? I just have to. We're not prohibiting him because he can go to the 10. So we're not prohibiting him from putting his solar because he can go to the 10 kilowatt. He's coming to us asking for relief on 5 different things on our bylaw. So that's where, we're not restricting him.
But the Massachusetts state law doesn't indicate the size that we have the right to prohibit or not prohibit.
Well, we set the bylaw up. 200 feet is what the town decided on. It's going from 200 to 35. I mean, the zoning board can give him a dimensional variance, but I still have to see that 200 feet worth of buffer is going into that 30 feet. And to me, if his neighbor's not satisfied, I'm not satisfied, and, I mean,
No, this is but see, and that's where I want everybody, this is the process of a special permit. This is what this whole process.
I'm glad we had the
is meant to do.
conversation, yes, don't
Right,
get me
that
wrong.
he has a right to come and say, I want to put this, and we have a right to say, well, yeah, no, maybe, and the residents have a right to say that this is all due process.
Because if this room was empty right now and his neighbors weren't against this, then yeah, I'd be okay with it.
Oh, right.
But for it to be demonstrated to me that there's adequate zoning is within that 35 feet, then it has to be okay with his neighbors.
Right.
And I don't see that.
No, I think this is our government at work. I think this is a great thing that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a problematic way to adjudicate special permit, though, because I mean, unless there are no neighbors, and, I think that there is always a chance, whatever you do, that, it's gonna, I mean, if they ask people's opinion on stuff they can do by right, I think if a couple people not wanting it, or even a bunch of people could prevent it from happening, I think you'd find not so much.
Well, he's not going by right, he's asking for a special permit. He has his 10 KW they can do by right. He's asking for more, and I'm not saying it's a bylaw being satisfied.
No, and this is my struggle, because this is what, like I said, this is what it's all about. I want to support him, but when we have a bylaw, and it's by special permit, so that gives, because we said there might be someone in the woods with 15 acres, and why would we say no? So that's why we made it a special permit, to have this subjective way to look at this, but we also have a right to say no subjectively on the measures based on the feedback we hear of the environment it's going to. And I'm not trying to confuse anything, but I look at the city of Fitchburg, and they have bylaws as well, and one of them was you can't do something, you have to be 50 feet off the road. So in where they were doing this, now there was a residence area that they weren't able to do this and not be in the next person's backyard. So they changed the bylaw that said if you are matching the neighborhood, and if every building is 10 feet from the road, well, why are we going to make him go 50 feet back? Because he's not aesthetically matching the neighborhood, and it was hindering development and all these things. So they changed that to make it blend with the neighborhood. So that's all part of what we have to think of here, and they have a right under special permit, the neighbors, to be a part of that conversation, and they don't if they're in an area where there's no neighbors that come.
Yeah, we absolutely need people's input. I guess the thing that troubles me is, I guess I would ask, which of the objective goals of the special permit, in addition to having heard, I mean, the really valuable, one of the really, and to me, the most valuable thing about public input is they convey knowledge. Like, we've learned a lot from the neighbors, about what the actual real-world impacts, at least perceived impacts are. It allows us to evaluate the situation more closely and accurately, and that's always the case with any project. If we just sat here, didn't go out, didn't hear from the neighbors, we would have a much less rich view of the actual physical projects we approve and how they're going to affect people. So, and so the neighbors in this case have also brought us valuable information. I don't dispute that. I think that after weighing all the input brought in and looking at the site, I mean, I don't think we need a process that gets a butter input and gets all kinds of different viewpoints. But at the end of the day, I feel like we have to make these determinations based on the criteria of the special permit. There is a subjective element because, like, we haven't been able to quantify the requirements in the way that we have for the by right stuff for this. I mean, by definition, in many cases, special permit, when it's augmenting by right stuff, is to deal with those cases where it's hard to quantify. But by the same token, I mean, I'm happy, Damon, you might be able to tell me which, aside from the fact that, clearly people believe it's going to disrupt them. I mean, and maybe that's the evidence. It's going to be injurious to public health because people believe it's going to be injurious. Beyond the statement, I don't actually see, when I look at the screening plan, potential screening plan, when I look at the opportunities to mitigate sound, I look at what we can do with conditions, I don't see where it's going to hurt the character, the scenic quality, or the sight lines, or be a serious public health problem. So maybe you see it differently, I don't know.
I see it as if you take away the fact that it's kind of shared conservation land and a neighbor's wooded backyard, if you forget the fact that that forestation is there, and you just viewed this as 30 feet off of his neighbor's property line, I don't think 30 feet of trees is going to satisfy that 200 feet of screen.
The question isn't, does it satisfy 200 feet of screening? The question is, does it satisfy impact on whatever the wording is, scenic quality or, public health or that type of thing?
Public health, safety, or welfare. That's what we can regulate.
And our bylaw, which, I mean, I wasn't there, I didn't write it, I probably would have gone with less than 200 feet, you guys wrote it, that's what the town voted on, and that's what these people are here defending, so I'm sticking with it, okay?
And for me, that's what I'm sticking to, because yes, we have the health and all of those things, but we have the bylaw.
And you, yeah, welfare, you talk about this perceived welfare is going to be detrimental to their welfare, so.
Because of their perception, not necessarily because it's objectively harming their welfare.
All right, well, we clearly don't agree, but that's why we vote. Everybody's vote counts.
That's true.
So we have a motion on the table with several conditions.
The motion doesn't have any conditions as of yet.
Oh, have you documented all the conditions that have been?
They would have to be, it'd have to be worked back into the motion.
Well, and not to Ken, but I don't think you and Nathan right now, I'm on the scale. I don't think you and Nathan have agreed on zone, you are okay with zone 1. Nathan had said zone 2, and I'm a zone 2 if I go at all this way. So
you could just add the condition that it would have to be in zone 2. I said I didn't care what zone it was in.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, I'll tell you what, I don't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of time fine-tuning the conditions if we're not going to get approval on it.
We're going to disapprove it anyway.
Statement right now is no, so.
So maybe we should amend the motion to vote on it to see if we could have any set of conditions.
Nathan made the original motion.
Oh, okay.
Is that correct?
It's correct that I made the original motion, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just asking this question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could we amend the motion to see, given any set of conditions, would the board approve it?
Sure, I mean, that can be part of your discussion.
Then if that passes, then we can hash out the conditions to see what the board would actually approve. But I'm with Nathan. I don't think working out the details of the conditions is a worthy use of time if it's not going to unanimously get approved anyway.
I mean, you could withdraw the motion and you could you could do that. It's really not worth voting on because it's not, because I don't understand how you would structure a motion of that sort. You could have that discussion. It seems that there's one member who has stated that they are not going to vote for any iteration of this plan.
Mm-hmm.
There's one member who seems to be still weighing their options.
Yes.
And there's two members who seem to agree that with specific conditions, they would vote in the affirmative. So, you know, I think it would be more of a discussion of part of the motion that's on the floor than a new motion, because making a motion to find out how people would vote is sort of just making any motion.
Okay, so did you capture the conditions that were part of our discussion?
I captured what I believe to be the conditions.
Okay.
We're talking about the sound study paid for by the applicant pre and post to verify the impact or lack thereof.
Okay.
The successful addressing of all items outlined in the Whitman Bingham, which, you know, I think there was 3 or 4 that would be reasonable conditions, and it's just a matter of adjusting plans to reflect them. A clarification from the building inspector that the ZBA and planning submissions are in continuity, that he would abide by all other approvals and conditions imposed by town boards, that the project would be moved to the zone 2, quote unquote, that the applicant would install the screening per his November 7th letter, the 150% of what was proposed at our October meeting, was it the 24th or the 27th. There was a potential discussion about the increase of the side yard setback from 30 feet to
What the shade line might support.
what the shade line, and I think that might be a little too vague. We'd have to come up with a specific number.
Yeah, so he has a shade line, he has a plan.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
And I
Oh, sorry,
understand.
keep
But
going.
I'm
Yep,
saying
yeah.
if we're gonna hash this out, there needs to be a number in it rather than what the shade line would support.
Sure.
And, you know, we can talk about practicable application, but that's, you know, probably more fine point than we need for this. Fencing is a big question mark, whether or not that's a condition. A fixed footprint and kilowatt output that would be noted on the plan and would be fixed per a date and time. Move the inverters as far from the array as possible, and that's what I have right now as the series of conditions.
Yeah, I would change that to as close to the middle of the width of the property or whatever, as opposed to distance from the inverter, because probably wouldn't want to stick it all the way on the apple orchard, because he might decide to, you know, build a condo development over there in the apple orchard someday and bug somebody else.
Maybe we just say that so that the sound is not disruptive,
Yeah, to future.
as opposed to just where it is. Don't dictate it. Maybe you could put them underground. No one's going to hear them underground.
So I just want to make the comment that a lot of engineering has gone into this, and I do respect Mr. Conway's engineering license, and for us to sit up here and redesign his project arbitrarily, having no real expertise in the field, and then not have it on paper for everyone to discuss and talk about, seems to be a little crazy to me. I mean, we're voting on something that was proposed to us. I mean, moving everything around and things of that nature, not looking at his shade line, not knowing all these things, and just doing it seems to be engineering after the fact by non-professionals, and I don't know if it's a good way to go about this. But I still...
Well, we're using the shade line he provided. We're using the target zone to move it to he provided. We're being driven by noise figures that he provided us with and adjustments based on a conversation we had with him. I mean, I get what you're saying. It's not ideal process, but it's not completely coming out of the backside either.
So we have a motion with conditions on the floor that's been seconded, right? Correct?
Yeah, so I would make so we amend the motion to include the conditions that Adam just read out. Oh, did you mention the fire stuff? Is that in Wes's thing?
Yeah, that is in Wes's.
Okay.
And I mean, we can add the condition that a clear path to the array shall be maintained year-round.
Yeah. I wonder if we need any condition, so on, you know, part of the reason for the determination is based on the overall lot size. And so I wonder if we need a, I mean, this is where things get annoying, but, you know, precluding the subdivision of this property, you know. So he's got this lot, this project.
That's reasonable.
Okay. So without special permit, the property won't be subdivided, something like, without?
No, you would,
Well, and that would all be if he goes to sell his home, the new owner would have to come in front of us to get the special permit out of his name into the new owner's name. We did that with the sawmill. If he sells, if we give him the solar field and in 5 years they move and the solar field is sold to, the house is sold to someone else, they now own that solar field.
Yeah, but I don't think we'd want to condition I think we'd want the permission to transfer with
Right,
the
that's
ownership.
what the new owner has to come in front of us to get approval.
What I'm talking about more is, let's say
But that
Adam could get, let's say we hypothetically
Yeah.
approve this, he comes back, he says, oh, that was great, thanks for the solar project, by the way,
Now I
I'm
want to
creating
do a
4
reduced
lots.
frontage lot. Yeah, I think, I know what you want to say, and there is a way to word it. I'm not coming up with it off the top of my head, but the condition would be that, that the lot remain at the size depicted for the life of the solar. And I believe that without additional wording, the special permit is going to transfer with the property. So unless you attach a condition that this special permit is only valid for so-and-so, or upon, the transfer of land, something to that effect. Otherwise, it's a special permit that's active and being acted upon, so.
God bless you.
If he sells in 5 years, the ownership of the solar, if he sells that along with the property, that special permit would just transfer because it's open and active. They wouldn't need to come back and get the board's blessing.
Well, I would want the new person to get the board's blessing, and only that or the person sitting here has pulled up the findings and directives, and the new owner knows these are what you're accountable for. I don't know if Mr. Conway explained all this to you, but these are, with the solar field, the rules that you have to abide by.
In theory, all of the conditions would be executed upon the operation of the solar field, so they would just be, other than the maintenance of the path to the field for the fire department. And oftentimes, when property transfers, if you have a decent attorney doing the title, they're going to find this attached through, because it's going to be attached to the property at the registry, because the final special permit has to be recorded at the registry of deeds in order to be considered active. So when you do a search on the property, this should come up.
Yeah, so I think the big thing here, Joanna, is in the special permit, one thing we didn't talk about yet is some maintenance requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, in Wes's peer review document, he also talked about, what are we gonna do with the bonding? We can go a few different ways with that. But basically, if we have maintenance requirements with some, whether it's, I don't know that there's anything in this, in the other projects, we required them to keep the field operational. Like if it's gonna be sitting there, it's gotta be doing what it's supposed to do. You can't let it just, panels break and
Is
whatever.
that not within the bylaw itself?
I don't know. I don't recall off the top of my head. I think we'd have to check.
Well, I know there was something in the bylaw about removal. That was towards the end. There is a whole bullet on removal of the solar field.
Yeah, there's also things about maintenance, and I think there's
Yes.
penalties if you, and
Yeah,
the other
there's
thing
a
is
whole paragraph.
penalties. So I think if you have that, and like he's saying, that's gonna apply to the new owner. We really don't have to do anything more than that in terms of transfer ownership, because they're gonna base, after it's built, it's all about maintenance. Maintenance is maintained by what's described in the conditions and whatnot. And there's some penalty attached. I forgot what the penalties were for the larger fields, whether it was possession by the town or what.
I'm just not comfortable with that. I look at the sewer department, and people are buying houses, and they snaked in their hookup, and the new guy saying, oh, I didn't know that we didn't have sewer, and I just have been on the sewer line, and the new owner's claiming, I never knew I wasn't supposed to be on the sewer line after a house sold. And I just am very uncomfortable that he could sell the house, and the new owner's running a solar field that potentially.
Yeah, I think, the problem with conditioning that is it becomes a real, I think, an unfair burden, like, on his investment in his property, and when he goes to sell, there's this big uncertainty this thing he wants to market as part of his property and would take significant loss if he didn't market as part of his property, is hanging over whether a board reissues a special permit. So I think, especially an installation of this nature, I think it's important that, as long as the new owner abides, ignorance not a defense in terms of the maintenance plan. It's in the orders and conditions. If they say, I didn't know, they say, oh, well, you either get with it or, the penalties start applying.
Well, I guess it always comes to us that I didn't know when the issue was occurring. So you're reactive, not proactive. I guess, for me.
That's true.
You find out that the new owner didn't know when something's happening that shouldn't be at the site that called us to go there. So I don't. It's like a liquor license. We don't just, if they sell it, we don't just put the liquor license in someone else's name. They have to go in.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would be a severe imposition for this type of project, having a penalty like that where it's going to a special permit process at post-acquisition is a really problematic. It's a big hit.
Well,
it'd be like you selling your house and the occupancy permit being conditioned on receiving a special permit after sale of your house. I mean, who's going to buy your house? Nobody. You have like a $150,000 solar system that the buyer might have to turn off if a board decides, oh, now, they've had second thoughts.
So I think these are all great things we could discuss when someone proposes a bylaw for a medium-sized system. Right now, we don't have one. I'm reacting to the bylaw we have. I would welcome anyone to come forth and write a medium-sized solar bylaw, and we would work with them and the residents and get to a conclusion that way. But right now, my vote for this, with the bylaws we have, is still going to be no.
All right, so I guess as far as amending my motion, I would, I do think we need a maintenance plan that's appropriate for this scale, containing similar provisions to what we had on the other projects. As I'm amending my motion now, I would not include a thing to require a special permit on transfer of the property. And that's how I motion to amend my original motion.
Where you're amending your motion and you're waiting for a second.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
Any more discussion?
No, I just want to make one statement. It was raised by someone about my letter to the editor. I just want to clarify regarding open meeting law. I explicitly conferred with town council before submitting a letter to the editor and received approval. So as far as legality and open meeting law, I just want to get that off the table.
No, you have a right as a resident to speak your thought process.
Is now an appropriate time to withdraw my application?
No, we got to vote. We got to vote on the table. Let's take the.
No,
He can request, and then the board needs to motion and vote if they're going to accept his request for withdrawal with or without prejudice.
I think if you let him make the motion, we also get an opportunity to respond to that motion. Because it's closed.
I think that's, if he makes that request, I think that's not unreasonable. Well, that's.
No, I would. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd request to withdraw the application in hopes that in the near future there's some more clarity around the medium-sized projects.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll let you.
Pursuant to 48 Section 16, this board does have discretion to entertain such a motion. However, this has been brought to the board's attention at the last hearing. He could have had the opportunity to do it then. He's also been before this board on 3 nights. You've expended certain funds on a peer engineering review. Your abutters have expended some significant amount of money on attorney's fees, as well as taking time out of their schedules to have meetings with Mr. Conway. And at this last moment, right before this board actually votes, which I believe is a little too late. I think if he wanted to do it, he should have done it at the end of the public hearing or prior to the time that you close public comments. For him to stand up after that is, in my opinion, in violation of the open meeting law. If that was a request of what you wanted to make, which he clearly had in his intentions to make as he took a straw poll from you last time, he didn't do it. I would respectfully request that you perform your duties, render a decision one way or the other on this application, as a significant amount of time has gone into it, and I think the protections of a 2-year, if in fact this board actually does deny it, there is a 2-year protection for the abutters, and that's what the abutters have sought to obtain tonight, and I think this board should respect that. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to accept the withdrawal of the application. I'm sorry? No, we let each one go.
So, what's the motion, Joanna?
To accept the withdrawal of the proposal by Mr. Conway.
Okay, I want to discuss it, but motion.
Well, we discuss it once we have the
Yeah, that's right. So motion to entertain the withdrawal by Mr. Conway.
So what is the precedence here, Adam? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. I mean,
this is an area that I'm not thoroughly.
So if we let him withdraw, he can reapply tomorrow, right?
correct.
And he could also wait for an amendment to the bylaw and a change in the bylaw, and then apply when that occurs.
I'm not clear on, even if he were denied, if there were an amendment to the bylaw, I'm not clear what the impact on that would be. In theory, he would be applying under a new bylaw, thus would have, it would negate the 2-year protection because it's an amended bylaw. That's my hunch. I'm not saying that that's 100%. That's a question that council would have to clarify. There is also the opportunity for him to show that he made substantial material changes and reapply. He'd have to get a finding that he's coming back with substantial material changes, and then he could go through the reapplication process within the 2-year period. But again, that, it's notice to abutters and all that kind of fun stuff for the Section 16 finding.
So I'm looking for a second on Nathan's motion.
Oh, second. Wait, what was Nathan's motion? It was to consider accepting?
To consider accepting the withdrawal.
Okay, second.
Okay, discussion.
So I'm sorry, just the last part there. So if we, just so I understand, if we accept the withdrawal, if we don't vote, basically, if we don't vote on the previous motion, then
did you?
I haven't withdrawn my other motion.
Then this motion, you have to withdraw the previous motion to have this motion. Sorry, it's General Roberts rule.
Can we discuss the implications here before I withdraw anything and all that? So
I think everyone in this room has spent an immense collective amount of man hours on this topic. I think it'd be a disservice to us and to the residents to just withdraw it after all that effort of these people showing up all these nights.
We'll see. And that's where I differ, because I think that if Mr. Conway wants to walk away and come up with maybe something different, that we should try to give him the right to do that without penalizing him for 2 years, without coming up with any other idea.
But his neighbors have gone out and hired a lawyer. That's funds out of their pocket.
And he did as well.
I understand that, but still, he could reapply tomorrow and they'd still have to dish out more money to their lawyer. I feel like they should deserve some kind of reprieve after expending those funds and these hours. That's my feeling.
And again, this would be for
And there's always a chance for him to propose a new bylaw too, which I think that he would have the right to reapply under if there's a new bylaw. So,
Well, that was just what you recommended they do.
yeah, and I
And
would like
think
to,
that's what he's thinking he would do.
and it's gonna take time to do that.
Right.
And I feel like that he would, if there's a new bylaw, I feel like he would be able to apply when there's a new bylaw. I think that's reasonable, right?
Again, I believe that that's the case, but I'm not going to make a legal opinion on that because I would want to verify with town council. The other thing is, if he were to reapply tomorrow, this whole show would happen again. So one can infer that should he come back and look to reapply, he would, in all likelihood, be making material changes. Thus, he could go through the process of getting the finding that he has made the substantial material change and then move through the special permit process again. Again, you know, that would be within the 2 years. There's additional findings that go into that, but what it does is it prevents him from proposing the identical project over and over and over and continually being denied until, for some reason or another, everybody on Cortlandt Circle is on vacation at the same time, and he finds a date and has that hearing.
I just can't imagine throwing all their hours away. I mean, it's not throwing it away, but still.
All right, well, we've got, Nathan's got to either withdraw his first motion before we can look at this motion. So Nathan, are you willing to withdraw your first motion?
I need to understand a little bit more of the implications.
Okay.
So substantially changed could be bigger, could be smaller, could be different location. What substantially?
Well, again, it's a subjective decision on you determining that what he has changed is considered to be substantial.
Okay, so it would be it would be different than what we're
And
voting
I'd
on.
have to, yes, it would be different than, and normally this process is zoning board items that come to the planning board under section 16.
Mhm.
How it works where it's a planning board special permit, I don't know if the zoning board would adjudicate it or you would have to determine it. Again, that's something that I can clarify.
Gotcha. But one of the two of us would determine.
Correct.
Okay.
So what would you like to do, Mr. Luckman?
So what is the voting, so we require, given our board situation of
All four.
we require 4 out of 5, what's the voting pattern for accepting the withdrawal?
I believe where it's special permit, it's going to, I believe it needs to be the same as the,
Is the other, okay.
yes, correct, as the vote for the board. Or the board, gee, it is late.
It's got to be unanimous.
I believe so.
Okay, well, I tell you what, I'd like to keep the original motion on, put the stake in the ground. This is what the 4 of us voted on today. So I think we talked about what conditions were in there. So I guess we're ready to vote.
Okay. No more discussion? Everybody's good? All in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Shoot, it just went out of my mind. What's the, abstain? Thank you. Can I abstain?
You can do
I
whatever you
abstain.
want.
Do we have any other business tonight?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
We have a full agenda.
You only have one more thing. You only have one more thing.
So do we need to close the, we closed the public?
You already closed.
We already closed the
Okay, we're
public
good?
hearing,
Okay.
voted on that. I feel so bad because Mr.,
So I think you get 265 Pleasant Street Solar is next.
To accept the withdrawal was taken.
yes. And we stayed with the original.
Technically, it was.
With 2
Yeah.
for, 1 against, 1 opposed. I'm so sorry for Mr. Conway.
Could you ask Amy to pass me down his Highfield plan?
Ken, can you pass down your Highfield plan?
Thanks, Wes.
Thanks, Wes. And minutes, do we have minutes down there? I'm sorry.
Now you make me make 2 trips.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, I obviously need the exercise.
I do.
Okay.
You have mine?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Oh, I thought I gave you. Yeah, I gave you my Highfield.
Yes, I do.
And my solar, you can hold that. Do you want Marjorie to hold your Highfield Village till January? So you don't say you forgot it? Your Highfield Village that we continued to November 10th. Do you want Marjorie to hold your
this?
folder?
Folder?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just give it back to...
She'll give them back to you in February.
That's this package, right?
Yes.
Because I have notes on this stuff. Oops. Oh, okay. That goes in there.
So we don't have to make copies again in February.
Nope, this goes in there too.
Okay?
You're not going to change the dates?
Apparently not.
Yeah, she updates it with the new one. Okay. All right, Matthew's back. Welcome back, Matthew.
Thank you.
You were missed.
Sorely.
Okay. Next on the agenda, let's talk more solar, because I'm not solared out. We have, next on the agenda is, oh, I don't even know where I am. Number 5, 265 Pleasant Street Solar. Hi, Eric, how are you?
My name's Eric Aubrey. I work with Gerlinger Solar, the contractor for the 265 Pleasant Street project. So we're just coming before you. We met a few months ago, or several months ago, just about the utility poles that were located at the site on 265 Pleasant Street. At that time, it was brought to our attention that there was a conflict between what was required by Unitel, the utility, and what was allowed by the planning board's order of conditions. After those initial meetings, due to the DOER deadlines, the board agreed, as well as the abutters, to allow us to continue and bring the system online if we came back and worked with the abutters to make the poles, work with them to make them more aesthetically pleasing as much as possible, and also to come back and ask for final permission to keep the poles if possible, or provide the option of what would be required if we did not have the, if we went to pad-mounted equipment. So during that time, we have worked, I believe, in good faith with abutters in the area. I think that we've worked pretty well with them. I think we've tried to keep them pretty much up to speed with everything we've done. I think we've tried to keep the town, at least through the building inspector or through Marjorie or through somebody, and make sure that everything is, that we've worked to move everything forward as best possible, but also keep everything transparent in what we were doing. We were also able to work with Unitel on the poles, and they actually were able to provide a lot of flexibility, and were able to make some adjustments in their typical requirements. They couldn't remove the requirements necessarily for the equipment, the safety equipment that they require for their systems for solar arrays, but they did loosen their requirements for utility poles and locating those poles and their location and vicinity to each other. One of the big things that they were able to let us do is push the poles towards the tree line, which is not something they normally would do. So they allowed us to take the, just a little back to the history of it, but there was 4 poles that we needed to allocate, to line up on the property. What they allowed us to do is push them much closer to the tree line, which is one of the suggestions I think the board made, and we said, let's try and get them at least so they can somewhat blend in with the tree line. Unitel did let us do that, so they actually let us go a lot closer than they typically would allow us to go. They also allowed us to reduce the typical size that they would have, or distance that they would have between the poles. So typically they would have 30 feet, they allowed us to shrink to 15, and some that they have typically 50 feet to 60 feet to 100, they allowed us to get down to 30 feet. So we were able to actually shrink those poles to where it was actually within the tree line, whereas before it would have been actually extending out into the field, mostly affecting the vista from the abutters to the south. So we were actually able to squeeze that in, get that within the tree line so that they all actually were within the existing tree line that was on the site. So we were actually able to work through that. And then we also, we did bring also the data, and I forwarded the data, what would be required if we did, so we did talk with Unitil and said, okay, what would we need to do, as we promised the town, what if we do need to remove this, what has to happen? So they did provide the equipment that we would have to provide is, the best case Unitil actually came up with is that they still needed the safety equipment. They responded to us with an email that I forwarded to the town, and it states that the DTT, direct transfer trip, which is their safety mechanism to shut the system off if there's any kind of inconsistency in our site, and to protect their grid. They said that those pieces of equipment didn't need to stay pole mounted, and they would not allow that to change due to their standards.
That's the one pole.
That's the 2 poles, the first 2. So the first 2 poles have the direct transfer trip. So that's the system that if we have some kind of a blip or they have a blip, it just shuts us off, and it keeps us off until they reset that.
Can those 2 poles be at the road? Do they have to be?
Those have to be next to each other. We had looked initially whether they could be the 2 poles that were on the side. They do need to be the 2 poles. They need to be side by side. They need to be located together. The other issue you have is at the base of one of them, you would have equipment at the bottom of it. So if you put it across the street, you would actually be putting a racking system on the person across the street, which is a much worse situation for that person. And then there's the 3rd pole. So they discussed the problem that you have is you have a lot of equipment on the 2nd pole. So that means that you actually need a 3rd pole to actually come down. You wouldn't be able to come down that 2nd pole. So their response or their design came up with that even if we went with pad mounted equipment, we would still end up with 3 out of the 4 poles. So we would be able to get rid of one piece of one pole, but we would end up having 2 pieces of pad mounted equipment. So we did look at the pricing. It was estimated at a couple $100,000, I think, to do the total reconstruction, to rip the pole down, pull the conduit, conduct the wires back, build the new pads, rip the conduit out of the ground, and reroute the conduit. So we looked at that. I also did place the pads out there. I did a mock-up with some caution tapes and stakes. I put some cones that would represent the bollards, which are the protective posts that will be around them. Typically what you see in a parking lot or anywhere where there's equipment in a field, you're required to have that protection around the equipment. So I did place that equipment out there as well. That actually does push it further in because you're actually getting rid of 1 pole, but you're adding 2 pieces of equipment because you're adding the meter pad and the switch gear. So it does push that out further. We did try to keep it tight. Same thing, I did the minimum distance that we could to get it into the tree line. We're looking at other options. Is if it goes out into the field, then you're back to where you have bollards and pad mounted equipment in a field. So that being said, it does push it out further into that field. So we did look at that. We did have the abutters look at it. I think, we've had the abutters across the street. We've always been talking with them, and the abutters right there. And feel we've got their opinion that they're now accepting of the poles, so that they do blend in. The poles, they've blended enough where you can't see them in the foliage. You don't really see them, and they've come to some acceptance of that. So I guess our purpose here tonight, I guess, is to seek approval to keep the poles as is and not have to go to the pad mounted equipment. That would be our request, is if possible, that with the feedback and with what would be required to switch it out, and what the alternative is, that the poles right now, with what Unitil has allowed us to do and what we've been able to do with tightening them up and putting them in the tree line, is an acceptable option now.
Any questions?
Does anybody have any questions for Eric? You good?
I don't have any questions.
Do you have any public comment? Do you?
Well, we're okay with it.
Can you come up to the mic? Thanks, Celeste. I know where you about the property.
Just for old time's sake, Celeste McCain Stober, 275 Pleasant Street. I am directly, let's see, if you're looking at the array, I am directly to the right, so I am a direct abutter. And, you know, the polls have gone up, and like we said, we've been working with them. It's night and day from the last company to their company. And really, there's probably like one of the poles that we'll see, you know, that we see through the trees, but because we had them move it over there, it's sufficient. So we're okay with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you introduce yourself?
I did right at the beginning. I know, it's past our bedtime.
It is. No, my mind's going, I'm still on Mr. Conway.
Yeah, me too.
Which impacts this group. And I sent you an email, Eric, because it's 2.5 years later and I'm still getting emails on Pleasant Street and West Townsend, so to have another person come, the neighbors are just in because I drive up Pleasant Street and I'd be mortified if I lived there 3 years ago and I live there today.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I mean, that's, you know, why we fought for the bylaw, and I do agree with what Mr. Alonso said earlier, that, you know, our intent was not to prohibit solar. We're all in favor, but, you know, the small scale should be on someone's roof or a small little array that is, you know, for their, you know, personal use. If it's going to be a small commercial, yeah, we have that bylaw in place for the really small ones, but really, the commercial solar shouldn't be in a residential area,
right.
Period.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we need work on the bylaw, but we, you know, that wasn't our intent to have other people come in and say, well, I want a waiver because I don't have this lot that we've envisioned. It wasn't to be an egregious waiver, though. You know, it's, you know, for special things, just like Mr. Alonso said previously, you know, if there's a 10-foot variance or a small kilowatt variance, we can overlook that. But for something that's way out of proportion to what we intended for the bylaw, shouldn't be approved. And I don't think the bylaw prohibits any of it. But we need to work within what we put out there. Yeah.
Go ahead, Nathan, I'm sorry.
But yeah, we don't have any problem with the polls.
Do you have a question for Celeste?
Yeah, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, hey, Celeste, thanks for coming. Thanks very much for taking your time to come out to talk to us tonight.
Yeah, it was so hard to keep my mouth shut. It really was.
You did a great job.
A question about, so this probably goes without saying, I mean, you've been very involved with your neighborhood and in this issue, and I just don't want to take it for granted. I just want to ask you, so
I keep tabs on this one too.
no, so as far as Pleasant Street goes and this poll thing that's before us right now, have you gotten input from your neighbors as well on this? I know they're not here tonight, but
No, well, we have talked to the other neighbors, and as far as when we came to, when we got the bylaw approved,
yep.
And then when construction started, really the neighbors that are further away have all come to an agreement on their own that, you know, we fought the fight we wanted to fight. As far as the small details, like where the poles go,
yep.
that's not, it doesn't impact them at all. So they're of no opinion that they're not involved in that because they don't feel that they should be.
Okay.
So yeah, so my coming here to say we're okay with the polls,
yep.
They're okay with that.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Celeste? Yeah. I apologize. No, I don't remember your name. I apologize.
Yeah, David Milner.
David, Dan and Dave. There we go. Dave, I want to talk to you. I did email Eric. I drive up Pleasant Street, and I got pictures. A gentleman called me at home the other night from West Townsend. And when you pull in his driveway, you can actually see the sign on your fence that says no electrical high velocity. Well, what does it say?
Danger,
High voltage.
Okay. You can
This is Chase Road?
Chase, you can actually see it from his driveway, his backyard, his porch. And we committed that vegetation, they wouldn't see anything. And he sees this all 4 seasons, not just winter, 3 months. And you drive up Pleasant, and I can see the solar array driving all the way down as I'm making the turn at the end of Pleasant. So we really got to fix that vegetation because we shouldn't see it. And I remember you told me the story of the one you own in Dudley, and your house is right.
Swansea.
Swansea, your house is right in the middle, and you don't want to look at it. And
Well, yeah, we do look at it from a vegetation. We moved the pole out from the middle into the forest
Okay.
and went underground. So I was talking about that, but
Okay.
Eric just told me about this, so I had not seen either any of the photos or the comments. Again, when we stepped in, we knew there was a vegetation requirement, a certain number, and I know a lot of money, and Eric would probably know the exact number, was spent on the actual vegetation requirement. Eric says a lot have died, which is somewhat normal, but maybe more than the normal percentage. And there's anything that's dead will be replaced. And then what I don't know is whether that then fixes it or whether it's something beyond. And I do think it's exactly what was required in
Okay, well, because I guess
plan.
the
So there
next-
might be like 3 or 4 issues going on. And I just heard it
Okay.
tonight.
Because I guess then that's my issue. Because if it's that you did to exactly what our bylaw said, then our bylaw isn't correct. Because the intent of the vegetation is that the people don't see it.
I don't know if it was the bylaw. I thought it was
Well, it's
it's the plan
Plans were based
that
on
was
the bylaws.
approved that had the size.
Well, that plan
number
that we
and
sat
scope.
with, I wasn't gonna see it. The landscape architects that came here before you, we weren't gonna see the fencing. We were planting all kinds of different things to buffer that. And that was the only thing that held me back on the one that was just in front of us, is because like I said, 2 years later, people are still seeing these panels. And that, the goal of the vegetation was not to see panels from my window. So I want to know if it's a bylaw issue or if it's a planting issue, and let's fix whatever that issue is going forward, because I would be devastated if I had a beautiful field and now I'm looking at 9-foot solar panels out every back window. So I don't know which one.
And I actually don't, I mean, I
Okay.
don't know the answer
Okay.
to that.
No, I think, I mean, realistically, it's a reality problem. I mean, for him, the photos that you showed, he is probably either on the second floor or the first, even if he's on the first floor. The views that they had in the drawing are not what was on the drawings. So you did have the landscape architect's view, which was a rendering of him looking across the site and having his view blocked by trees. Those trees, if you scaled off, are 24 foot high or 25 feet high. I don't know how you would take 20, I don't think or understand. I guess the thing is, it's tough to expect that you would have expected 25-foot trees to be uprooted somehow and transplanted to that site, because that's impossible. So what the plantings that we have out there are actually somewhat, you either have, typically most solar fields are, you have a 3 to 4 foot arborvitae that's provided at most sites, most towns. This one actually does have much further or much exorbitant planting schedule. There's 134 trees. I think there's 160, I think, at the whole site. And if you look at Pleasant Street, the number of trees there is much larger than we've typically seen. And like I said, typically it's arborvitaes that are planted at 4 feet. These are coming in at 5 to 7 feet to 6 to 8 feet, which is not, it's definitely a bump up from a normal, a big jump up in terms of vegetation plan or vegetation buffer.
I know ours was a big jump up because I'm 4'11", and I said the trees have to be taller than me.
Yeah.
So I know they tried, the landscape plan tried for 4 feet, and we said absolutely not, we would not accept that.
Right, but once you get past 8 to 10, I don't know how you get bigger trees transplanted at that level. And like I said, for him to have that, the screenshot that he has is a 25-foot tree. If you look at that photo, those trees that are out there, I did measure them. I showed him, Adam, some photos today, and you can actually tell that fence is a 7-foot fence. It's not a 6-foot fence. I thought it was 6. If you look at that fencing, those trees are all 6 to 8 feet high. Because I know one of the comments was that they were all 4 feet. They're not 4 feet. They're 6 to 8 feet high. So they're actually in that range. If anything, they're on the upper end of that range. But the problem is the body is, you have, just like a Christmas tree, you have the strand that comes up, and then the body's at around 6 feet. 5 to 6 feet is where you have the thicker body. But I don't know, in terms of the grading and the sloping there, there's, without planting 23-foot trees 134 times, I don't know how you're going to do that. I think the other issue, or not the other issue, but I think the other thing that the landscape architect probably had in mind was that the trees are fast-growing trees, so they will grow 1 to 2 feet. That's typically what you plant around solar arrays, is that they grow rapidly. But I think it's hard for them to, or hard for somebody to expect, or hard for us to provide instant vegetative buffering, you know, from day one. I don't know how we could do it. And like I say, if you look at the grading and that what he has for a view, it's probably much different from the ground than it is from his bedroom. But it is gonna take time for that vegetative buffer to fill in. And like I said, I don't know how. I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's the problem is you also have to separate the trees. You can't plant them right next to each other.
Yeah, he said you could drive a car through each tree, so he sees.
Right, but if I plant them together, they're going to die in 3 to 4 years. They're going to grow into each other. So they're not, and where they're spacing, we actually do have them, because of it is a tight corridor there, we have them pretty much as far as we can to be in that corridor. But you don't want them any tighter. If like I said, you are looking at having 20-foot wide trees, so you're going to start having issues later. Probably within 5 years, you're going to start having issues where they're going to start killing each other. So unfortunately, that's something that it's going to have to be looked at in vegetative buffer. But I don't know how with height-wise transplant. That site's a little different too. It is graded up, so it is.
Right, and that's why we talked about berms, and I mean, it was 3 meetings on just the landscape, and they had 3 different landscape people come in because we kept saying no. So, well, I'll look at the directives and go from there.
No, I mean, honestly, I am sorry, and I wish if we could do something, I think I think we would do it if we could. I just don't know what you can do there, and I think that is going to, unfortunately, that is a problem with certain sites that you can have. If they slope up, there's not much you're going to be able to plant. If you have a level playing field, you're probably going to be able to do something that you can work with. But again, if you look at Pleasant and Chase Road, in retrospect, and not happy with that, you really have much more than other towns have. A lot of towns do not have 200 feet from property line to the edge. They don't have that vegetative buffer. They don't have a lot of that. And unfortunately, it's not satisfactory to these people, but they do have, in this town, you should be proud in terms of protecting them to some degree, because you really do have a higher standard than any other town that I've met, so. Yeah.
Any other questions from? Okay.
Can I just comment?
Yes.
I just want to comment about the vegetation, because you brought up berms. And I just want to put it, just from my own opinion, when that subject came up, we opted not to have berms along our wall because I didn't want to feel boxed in. So I'm sure the neighbors down the array, that literally have it right behind them, they might feel boxed in because of those berms. And it's, 2020 is hindsight. So yeah, you can, if you're in my backyard, you can see it. If you're on my deck, we can see it. I could probably see it from my second-story window, but it is, they have to get the sun, so they can't crowd trees right over there. I was very grateful that they left the tall trees along my stone wall, because that really does help. And from my house, the trees do block it, but those trees are more than 50 years old, so I mean, they're huge. So yeah, I think it is going to take time for them to grow in, and it may never be perfect. And like from my yard, we don't have a berm, so you kind of do have just kind of little sticks of trees in a little row that you see, and you'll see the fence and the solar array through it. But it is what it is. We can't do anything about it.
Right, and I know.
But I'm much happy not to have any berms and things like that.
And I know West Townsend was different because they're all up on a hill, so they're looking down at it where you're parallel with it.
Right.
So it was two different.
It is, and I haven't been in people in that neighborhood that were active with our group. I haven't been in their homes to actually see it.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak for them. But at some point you do have to come to a compromise, because, we did what we could at the time, and hey, if I could go back in time and say, hey, let's put a few more things in the bylaw, yeah, I would.
Well, and you can.
I will make suggestions, trust me.
No, we could always update, because you learn.
But we're living with it now, and, we've come, to know our new neighbors. And it's fine. It's not something we'd rather look at every day, but it's better than having a apartment building, I guess, if I have to pick the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the landscaping, I mean, yeah, I didn't expect it. I think what sticks in my head is the landscape architect that came in was originally was when EPG had this, and they showed us a real pretty picture of all kinds of different trees. So, but I do think what they explained was, it was going to grow to that. So we know it's not going to start out that way. And yeah, I can go to, there's a place in Lancaster that probably sells 20-foot maples, but that's definitely cost prohibitive and requires large equipment to get it in, and we've had enough of that. Yeah. So it might just be a matter of time for him to just wait for it to grow in. But if he's looking down on it and he's on his second story or standing on his roof, putting a new roof on, he's always going to see it. So that's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so in front of us is evidently, I think they're asking us to vote on not utilizing the ground mount, and to stay with the 4 telephone poles that are currently at 200 Pleasant. I think that's Steve DeBank. What's the address? What's the address? 265, I'm sorry. 265 Pleasant Street, I believe, is what we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, this is a discussion. The board had directed Eric to come back and show the options for removing the poles. And, there was no discussion as to whether or not it was a need to amend the special permit. So this was a discussion of, here's what the items are. Does the board feel there needs to be an amendment to the special permit? Or do you feel that what was done in the general spirit of the development, and everybody's just sort of going to go forth and prosper?
Well, I think the special permit would need to be amended because it does say it needs to be ground mounted. So if we're going to go to the poles, we need to, I think, modify that says, yes, we voted to accept the poles in place of the ground mount.
Okay, then.
That's just what I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that would be a decision of the board, and at that point, then Eric would go back and put together his amendment package and file it, and at that point, you'd vote on accepting that amendment.
Okay.
Now, is there any way to do it as an administrative change, or no? Is that not an option, or if it's deemed just a change?
Yes, I think we could do it as an administrative change.
Well, then you could do that tonight if you think you can do it administratively.
I don't know, I'm asking you. Because I know.
It sounded like you were saying, yeah, we.
No, I'm like, yeah, I think we could, because I know we've done it with Emerald Place on the different size buildings, and they had 3 across the street, then they went to 2, so.
I've already worked for my paycheck tonight.
Us too.
I'm going to give you all a 100% raise.
Thank you. I was going to say, yeah, at least you're getting paid. I'll be getting beat up in the newspaper tomorrow.
It says that all modification requests to solar voltaic installations, including changes in arrays, addition to number of arrays, or change in placement made after issuance of the required building permit, shall require review through the development plan review for compliance with this bylaw.
So you could consider the telephone poles part of the arrays? I would not.
I mean, it's
utility owned.
Yeah, and that's why I wonder if they need to modify. Yeah.
More, it's what they.
So it's basically one of our directives. They want that we're basically saying we're going to relax the enforcement of a directive, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, what you're saying, I mean, it would be equivalent to what I would consider a field change.
Okay.
Upon doing construction, this was imposed on us by forces beyond our control. We hit ledge 6 inches underground in a place that we didn't think it was going to be. The Unitil came out and said, you're going to do this, or you can't hook up.
It's like an act of God, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of what it is. It doesn't substantially change the character of the development. And even if you were to go ground mounted, the character of that portion of the development is going to remain substantially the same.
Yep.
So you're probably actually reducing the impact because you're taking 2 pieces of pad mounted equipment and replacing them with a singular pole. whereas those 3 poles are going to remain in place even if you're ground mounted based on the requirements of the utility. So, ultimately it's up to the board whether or not you want to require them to come and, dance to get
No, I don't think
the
so.
vote.
I
But
just want it in writing that we approved, so in 2 years, people don't come and say, oh, no, that was supposed to be ground mounted, it's telephone poles. So I just want it somewhere documented that we changed the directive from ground mount to poles, that's all.
I think that's reasonable.
Actually, if I can add, I don't know if there was a directive in terms of equipment being pad mounted. It was, the note on the drawing said all utilities will be underground.
Right.
No.
So I think my interpretation at the time was it meant our
Right.
project utilities, which is why we ended up in the Unitil poles. That's why I didn't consider that. So really, there was never a directive in terms of equipment being on pads or anything like that. It was, right, it was just that all utilities be underground. But that's why I would look at that. It's not really, it wasn't a directive or anything like that. It was a note on the drawing that said that. So really, it's a modification to the note that's on the drawing that just says all utilities will be underground, in my eyes.
And
I don't know if that helps or not. So,
the utilities in the street are above ground.
correct.
So at some point,
Right.
the utilities have to come out of the ground.
Right, we were doing one pole.
Correct, but, and again, I think that's where field change comes in. You're dealing with Unitil, who ultimately dictates how you can connect to their system.
Gotcha. So as far as how we deal with this, so we vote on it, and how does it get captured, if
Right,
at all?
that's all.
I mean, I think that what I would say is, I know you've sent a variety of different letters. Do you have one that strictly outlines that it's Unitil's requirement?
So the last one that I sent you from Unitel outlines that actually it requires, now that was the change to go to the pad mounted equipment.
So I
don't
guess
know if
what
we
I
have it.
would suggest is that,
We do from the June meeting.
Yeah, I was
We had
gonna
in
say,
writing.
we
actually,
My understanding was the intent of the June meeting was to allow it to proceed,
Right,
but the requirement was to come back
right,
with alternatives, and at that point, it would either continue to proceed, or we would take down 1 or 2 poles, whatever they would require, and that would be a discussion. And I remember Mike said, you better come back by December or whatever,
Right.
or I'm gonna, because he was in a position where he gave the CO, but we have to come back, so what's the leverage, all this conversation.
right. I just need to know what we need to do as a board to update the records to show that we switched from underground to,
Could it be a letter just confirming that A, we did come back as we said we would, and B, that
You need to
we're
continue.
well, I'll just tell you what I was thinking. It makes sense for your company to submit a letter to the board that says, in the installation of the solar field at 265 Chase Road, we committed to putting all utilities underground. Upon signing interconnection with Unitil, these are the conditions they imposed upon us. Our discussions with the board lead us, and the neighbors lead us to believe this is, the least impactful, most appropriate way to do it. Flower it up a little bit. Does the board accept this? And leave spaces for the board to initial. Submit that to the board at their next meeting or the first meeting in December. We'll put it on as an action item. They'll say, we accept this field change. They'll initial the letter. It'll go in the file, and we'll send you a copy back. And that way, there's a history attached to it.
Exactly.
It discusses why this is like that, and the board says, we find that this accepts, it's acceptable in general spirit, and, everybody kind of blesses it and goes on their way.
and I don't think you need to be here, just submit it.
Yeah.
You don't need to comment.
That becomes administrative in essence.
Correct,
Exactly.
correct.
And we have a trail.
We're happy to do that, and I think that is in the spirit of providing the history and the facts and having it in the file to say everybody's.
Right. And that's what Mike said, and I said, and make sure you plant as many trees as possible and hide those poles, so people will forget there's poles.
Luckily, there were 50-year-old trees to hide it in.
All right, thank you.
But there's never enough trees apparently.
Yeah.
Is that good for you? That makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And you don't need to come back, just submit the letter. You don't need to present it, just submit it. Yep.
Let's check with, is everybody?
Is everybody okay with that? Matthew, everybody good? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Have a good evening. Thank you for being so patient.
If you need any assistance with the bylaw, I can offset Celeste.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Eric. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Good idea, actually.
Talking about solar for like at least 3 months.
Thank you. Okay, going back, we have a couple things. Leominster Shirley Road, no report. Notices and and communications. They scanned to you, there's a stormwater presentation being held at the Lunenburg Library, November 19th at 7 PM. If you want to go to that, all are welcome.
You should register.
Register, yeah, online, there's a email, you just email the person that's hosting it. Our next meeting is November 24th here at Town Hall.
Yes.
Okay.
And that is the week of Thanksgiving. We don't have any hearings scheduled as of yet, do we? And I bring that up, I don't know who's traveling, if anyone, and that may be,
Do we have a quorum?
yes.
The week of Thanksgiving, is anybody going away? Will everybody be here that Monday?
I'll be here.
I'm here.
I'm here.
I may be here.
Okay. So we got a quorum, perfect.
Okay.
December 8th and then the 22nd, and possibly the 15th. We'll look at that
Yeah.
if need be. Any public comment? Seeing none. Any board comment?
I think we need to get, I have a comment.
Please.
I think we need to start getting our material sooner than the day of the hearings. I don't know if we can require submissions or applicants,
You
but
certainly
I think
can.
we should.
You can set board policy.
I think we should do that.
I think it should be in Thursday before, like when we get our packets.
I think it should be 1 week
I deal
prior.
with that with other towns all the time, and I think
Yeah.
that's reasonable.
That's not an unreasonable thing to
If it
do.
doesn't make it into the package, it's not on the agenda.
Yep.
Well,
And
and I would say Thursday by 5, because we're open till 6, so that gives any last-minute things for Marjorie to submit.
Yeah.
Because again, if they submit it at 11 o'clock on Thursday, we don't get it till Monday because we're closed. So I would say by 4 or 5 Thursday.
okay, well, what I'll do is I'll write up a policy and send it around, and you guys can adopt it the next time around.
Perfect.
And, once we get information in to the office, we are sending it out
Oh, you are?
immediately, so
Oh, yeah.
it's,
Oh, you're Johnny on the
we're trying to get it to you as quickly as
Yep.
possible, but people tend to wait until the last minute sometimes, so.
Sure.
And, it's not an uncommon thing for, like Damon said, for boards to say,
No,
if it's not in here, it's not considered submitted till the next meeting.
I think I was thinking expressly of the meeting that got continued today because of the review comments that didn't get here until whenever. It's just, that was a waste of a lot of people's time.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree with you, 100%. Okay, any other board comment?
Said
I-
enough tonight.
I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Second, I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good night, everybody, and again, I thank you for your patience, tolerance, and your hard work.